So this is the Rules and Legislative Oversight Committee. Today we will be hearing nominations for the Commission on Aging and Retirement Education. I am Councilman Schleifer, Chair of the committee. I am joined by my colleagues. I'll go in order of how I see them. Councilman Costello, Councilman Torrance, Council Vice President Middleton, Councilman Conway, and I know Councilwoman Ramos will be joining us momentarily. She just sent me a message. And so I want to thank you all for your willingness to serve on this commission. The format will be very simple. I'll give each one of you an opportunity to introduce yourself. Keep it short and sweet. You know, under a minute is usually preferred. And then if there's any questions from the committee, we will ask you those questions. We have reviewed your resumes. And so without further ado, we'll get started on the first one on the list, which is EA 21-0032, and that is Jim Campbell. So Jim, if you can take it away.
I don't think he's signed in yet, Mr. Chair. I haven't seen. There's a few members who haven't signed in yet.
Okay, we'll move on to the next one and come back to him. Is EA 21-0033, Barbara Cornman.
Yes, hi, thank you. My name is Riva. I actually have been serving on the commission until its recess. I joined in November 2017. At the time, I was director of an interprofessional program in geriatrics and gerontology education, which served caregivers, students training in health professional and social work, with the idea of getting them involved and knowledgeable about the field of aging and for professionals in addition to caregivers. Since retirement, I have been serving on a number of nonprofit organization boards and advisory boards in Baltimore City, all of which serve older adults living in the community, and it would be my privilege to join the commission once again. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you very much. Do any members of the council have any questions? No? Okay, we'll move on to the next one. EA 21-0034, Thomas Cujo. I see Thomas on, but he's muted. Thomas, if you're speaking, you're muted. If you can please unmute yourself.
Good morning or good afternoon. My name is Thomas Cujo. I'm a geriatric School of Medicine. I provide in the community for our home-based medicine program and lead a program of research that focuses on supporting and understanding the role of social connections on the health of older adults. I previously served on the commission and excited about the potential opportunity to serve more, working to support the health and well-being of older adults here in our city. I live Councilman District 7, and I look forward to working with you all and others on the commission in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Do any members have any questions for Mr. Cujo? Go ahead, Councilman Torrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually don't have a question. I actually have a comment. I'm happy to see that Mr. Cujo, Dr. Cujo, a resident of the 7th District, has been nominated. Outstanding public servant in the 7th District, always active and ready to serve. And I'm happy that he's finding an additional way to serve.
Thank you very much. Next up is EA 21-0035, Monte Ephraim. I see you're muted. If you can unmute yourself and take it away.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Monte Ephraim. My pronouns are she, her. I am really excited and open and willing to participate in the commission. I am representing not just the LGBTQ community, but the community of Baltimore City. I've been working in older aging adult care for quite a period of time and have served on different conferences, participated in different venues, and I'm happy to be serving or nominated for this position. I look forward to working with everyone.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next nominee, EA 21-0036, Susan Francis.
Hello, I'm Susan Francis. I'm the Executive Director of the Maryland Volunteer Lawyer Service. We provide civil legal services for all of Marylanders, but have a focus in Baltimore City, where we provide both legal services and look for ways to reduce barriers to long-term sustainability in our city and in our various neighborhoods. And because of the nature of the work that we do, much of it disproportionately impacts older adults, and so have appreciated participating in the commission and look forward to continuing to do so.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions from the council? Seeing none, we'll go on to the next nominee, EA 21-0037, Daniel Hale.
Good afternoon. I'm Dan Hale. I'm trained as a clinical psychologist, but I currently work in hospital administration as special advisor to Bayview's president, Rick Bennett, who happens to be a geriatrician as well as an administrator. I also have appointments in psychiatry and in geriatrics. Been on the commission before. I'm looking forward to continuing on it. And one particular interest is that Dr. Mann and I have been working on for a number of years is how faith communities can be better partners with healthcare and government agencies. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And Richard, I see James Campbell in the attendees list.
Okay.
So if you can elevate.
We'll find him presently. We have, okay. Okay, he's on.
Okay, James Campbell, if you can unmute yourself and introduce yourself. Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can
Yes.
hear you.
Good afternoon, Councilman, and thank you. My name is Jim Campbell, former state delegate and social worker, and currently a state president of ARP Maryland, and looking forward to being on the Commission on Aging. I have a background in social work and working on issues affecting the elderly and especially the 50-plus population. Not sure what else I can add right now. I represented the Northwest Baltimore District, 22nd District with Senator Hoffman and Delegate Rosenberg and Maggie McIntosh when I was in the legislature.
All right, very nice. Thank you so much. Is there any questions from the council?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
Just a statement. You all know too that I also serve on this commission, and just want to welcome the new people and the people that we continue to have that history. So it is a very good mix of people to give different perspectives of how we're going to move forward with our aging community and population. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Thank you very much, Councilwoman. Richard, we can proceed to entertain motions to vote on these nominees. We'll start with 21-0032, Jim Campbell. Do I have a motion?
So moved, Torrance.
Moved by Torrance, seconded by Costello.
Roll call.
Yes, sir.
Chair Schleifer.
Yes.
Chair Schleifer votes aye. Mr. Burnett.
Mr. Burnett, he's excused. on his absence. Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Conway? We'll come back. I don't see him. Okay. Mr. Costello?
Yes.
I see him. Mr. Costello?
Yes.
Mr. Costello votes aye. Vice President Middleton? Welcome.
Yes.
Vice
Yes.
President, okay. Member Ramos? Just sign off.
Yes.
Votes aye. Mr. Torrance? Oh, come on.
All right. My computer's acting up. Aye.
Okay. Mr. Chair, there are 5 votes in the
Hold on one second. Councilman Conway was trying to unmute himself. He also voted aye.
Okay,
Yeah, that's an aye. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, there's 6 votes in the affirmative, no negatives. We can go to second reader at the August meeting.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to the next one. I'll entertain a motion on EA 21-0033, Barbara Cornman.
So moved, Torrance.
Moved by Torrance, seconded by Ramos.
Okay. Chair Schleifer?
Yes.
Chair Schleifer votes aye. Mr. Burnett? He's absent. Okay. Mr. Conway?
Aye.
Mr. Costello?
Yes.
Mr. Costello votes aye. Vice President Middleton?
Aye. And just a quick note, I think there is another nominee on this committee, Fran Johnson, that's present.
Okay.
It was just put in the chat.
She's 210038. We're coming to her.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. Yes. Member Ramos? Member Ramos?
Yes.
Member Ramos votes aye. Mr. Torrance?
Aye.
Mr. Torrance votes aye. Mr. Chair, there's 6 votes in the affirmative, no negatives. Second reader at the August meeting.
Okay, next up, EA 21-0034, Thomas Cujo. Do I have a motion?
So moved, Torrance.
Second.
Moved by Torrance, seconded by Middleton.
Okay. So Chair Schleifer?
Yes.
Chair Schleifer votes aye. Mr. Burnett is absent. Mr. Conway?
Aye.
Mr. Conway votes aye. Mr. Costello?
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Costello votes aye. Vice President Middleton?
Aye.
Vice President Middleton votes aye. Member Ramos?
Yes.
Member Ramos votes aye. Mr. Torrance?
Aye.
Aye. 6 votes in the affirmative, no negatives. Second reader in August.
Okay, next up is EA 21-0035, Monte Ephraim. Do I have a motion?
So moved, Torrance.
Second, Conway.
Okay, roll call. Chair Schleifer?
Yes.
Chair Schleifer votes aye. Mr. Burnett is absent. Mr. Conway?
Aye.
Mr. Conway votes aye. Mr. Costello?
Yes.
Mr. Costello votes aye. Vice President Middleton?
Aye.
Vice President Middleton votes aye. Member Ramos.
Yes.
Member Ramos, aye. Mr. Torrance.
Aye.
Mr. Torrance votes aye. Mr. Chair, there's 6 votes in the affirmative, no negatives. Second reading.
Okay, next up, we'll vote on EA 21-0036, Susan Francis. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second, Conway.
Moved by Ramos, seconded by Conway.
Okay. Vice Chair Schleifer.
Yes.
Vice Chair Schleifer votes aye. Mr. Burnett is absent. Mr. Conway.
Aye.
Mr. Conway votes aye. Mr. Costello.
Yes.
Mr. Costello votes aye. Vice President Middleton.
Aye.
Vice President Middleton votes aye. Member Ramos.
Yes.
Member Ramos votes aye. Mr. Torrance.
Aye.
Member Torrance votes aye. Mr. Chair, 6 votes in the affirmative, no negatives. Second reading in August.
Okay, next up is EA 21-0037, Daniel Hale. Do I have a motion?
So moved, Torrance.
Second, Ramos.
Okay. Chair Schleifer.
Yes.
Mr. Burnett is absent. Member Conway.
Aye.
Mr. Costello.
Yes.
Mr. Costello votes aye. Vice President Middleton.
Aye.
Vice President Middleton. Yep.
Aye.
Vice President Middleton votes aye. Member Ramos.
Yes.
Member Ramos votes aye. Mr. Torrance.
Aye.
Member Torrance votes aye. Mr. Chair, there's 6 votes in the affirmative, no negatives. We can go to second reading in August. That's the will of the committee.
Okay, thank you very much. So those of the nominees who have just been voted through, you are welcome to sign off as we have the second half of the hearing going through the other nominees. And so if we can just make sure the next packet of nominees are all elevated, we will proceed.
From the chair.
Yeah, we'll just proceed, and whoever's not here, we'll come back to. We'll start off with EA 21-0038, Elizabeth Francis Johnson.
Good evening. My name is Elizabeth Francis Johnson. I'm known to most people as E. Fran Johnson. I am a member of Zeta Phi Beta sorority, the Myrtle Tyler Faithful Fund, and the project coordinator for the development, construction, and later dedication in 2009 of the Zeta Center for Active and Healthy Adults in the Park Heights community. I have been on the commission for several years. I'm a social worker and an educator, and look forward to the opportunity of continuing with the commission.
Thank you very much. Next up is EA 21-0039, Sonia Merchant Jones.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sonia Merchant Jones, as you said, and I work currently for the State's Attorney's Office as a victim witness advocate. I chair my community organization, and I work with everyone, including our seniors. I look forward to the opportunity of serving on this commission. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Next up, EA 21-0040 of Reverend Brian Edward Murray.
Okay.
See him here. Is he on the attendees?
I don't see him, Mr. Chair. Let me look one other place.
He is listed as an attendee.
Yes, there he is. Okay, he's on. He's on.
Reverend Murray, if you can take it away.
I'm working on it now. I think I've almost got it.
You're on.
Now we see you.
I'm here, reporting for duty.
So take it away. You just have to introduce yourself. Tell us, give us a short background about yourself and why you want to be on this commission.
I'm Brian. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm Brian Murray. I am currently the pastor of New Covenant Community, United Church of Christ. For a number of years until last year, I was the co-chair of Bridge Maryland, which is a network of churches that deals with social issues. So needless to say, in that work, I've been in touch with all of the members of society. I have a particular engagement with our senior population, obviously being a pastor. And one of my dearest members is my 91-year-old mother-in-law, who has gone through a bunch of challenges. So I am somewhat aware, not somewhat aware, acutely aware of a lot of the issues that seniors deal with: isolation, limited income, access to health care, making sure that they have a voice. And I believe that in addition to the fact that prior to being full-time in ministry, I spent my corporate time in healthcare. So I'm acutely aware of some of the things that the senior citizens in Baltimore have to engage with. So if there's some specific questions that you would have, I can go from there, but you asked for a short summary.
Yes, thank you so much. Do any members of the council have any questions? No, thank you very much. We'll move on to EA 21-0041. Jenny Pina Hayes.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. So I'm a physiologist and a researcher with an expertise in aging. I'm currently a faculty member at Johns Hopkins, and I've studied diabetes and its complication in older adults at the National Institute on Aging. And my current research focuses on the effect of sex hormones in frailty and the decline in physical function among older adults with HIV. I have started the commission less than a year ago, and I thought it was a really interesting and commission and really active. So I'm looking forward to continuing to serve and providing my expertise and learning from the commission. And I would like to also add that I'm a proud resident of the 7th Council District. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councilman Costello.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Jenny, I just want to thank you for your service. Jenny's a friend of mine and someone whose work I've admired for a long time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. Councilman Torrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to highlight another great advocate in the 7th District, Dr. Hayes. Great neighbor, but also someone who I know I will always see serving our community, and proud to see her continue service on the commission.
All right, thank you. And the last nominee we have is EA 21-0042, Sarah Sanston, and she provided video testimony because she could not be here with us today. That link was sent around to the committee yesterday, so it was, assuming nobody has any objections to that, we'll do a first for the committee and allow her nominee to be entertained for a vote as well. So we'll start at the top. Can I get a motion on EA 21-0038, Elizabeth Francis Johnson?
So moved, Torrance.
Moved by Torrance,
Second.
seconded by Middleton.
And Mr. Chair, I just want to add also with this group, as I mentioned earlier, as a representative of the council on this commission, before us is a very diverse group with different perspectives, different ages, some with lots of history. And just a shout out to Elizabeth Fran Johnson, that also is a strong founder and supporter of the wonderful Zeta Center right there in Park Heights on Ricerstown Road.
Thank you. And Richard, we can do a roll call vote.
Chair Schleifer.
Yes.
Chair Schleifer votes aye. Mr. Burnett is absent. Mr. Conway.
Aye.
Conway votes aye. Mr. Costello.
Yes.
Mr. Costello votes aye. Vice President Middleton.
Aye.
Vice President votes aye. Member Ramos.
Yes.
And Ramos votes aye. Mr. Torrance.
Aye.
Mr. Torrance votes aye. 6 votes in the affirmative, no negatives. We can go to second reader in August. Okay.
Okay, next up, EA 21-0039, Sonia Merchant Jones. Do I have a motion?
So
So
moved.
moved, Torrance. Oh,
Moved by Ramos, seconded by,
Boom.
do I have a second?
Torrance, second.
Seconded by Torrance.
Okay. Chair Schleifer.
Yes.
Mr. Burnett is absent. Mr. Conway.
Aye.
Mr. Conway votes aye. Mr. Costello.
Yes.
Mr. Costello votes aye. Vice President Middleton.
Aye.
Vice President Middleton votes aye. Member Ramos.
I just want to explain my vote. Very high confidence in my constituent. She'll be a great resource and asset to this community. Thank you. To this committee. Thank you.
Member Ramos votes aye. Mr. Torrance.
If I may explain my vote, I high honorably do cast a yes vote for Ms. Murchison Jones, but also would like to identify that she is a great help in the 7th District as well as a great mentor in Baltimore. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Torrance votes aye. Mr. Chair, there's 6 votes in the affirmative, no negatives. We can go to second reading in August.
Thank you. Next up, EA 21-0040, Reverend Brian Edward Murray.
So moved, Torrance.
Second, Ramos.
Moved by Torrance, seconded by Ramos.
Okay. Chair Schleifer.
Yes.
Chair Schleifer votes aye. Mr. Burnett is absent. Member Conway.
Aye.
Member Conway votes aye. Mr. Costello.
Pastor Murray, it's excellent to see you again. It's been a while. A yes vote. Just want to thank you for your continued service to our city.
Good to see you.
Mr. Costello votes aye. Vice President Middleton.
Aye.
Member Ramos.
Yes, and again, to explain my vote, very happy that my constituent is applying for this position. He's got great perspective, and I look forward to serving with him. Thanks.
Member Ramos votes aye. Mr. Torrance.
Aye.
Mr. Torrance votes aye. Mr. Chair, there's 6 votes in the affirmative, no negatives. We can go to second reader in the August meeting.
All right, next up, EA 21-0041, Jenny Pina Deus Hayes. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Ramos, seconded by Costello.
Okay. Chair Schleifer.
Yes.
Chair Schleifer votes aye. Mr. Burnett is absent. Mr. Conway.
Aye.
Mr. Conway votes aye. Mr. Costello.
Yes.
Mr. Costello votes aye. Vice President Middleton.
Aye.
Vice President Middleton votes aye. Member Ramos.
Aye.
Member Ramos votes aye. Mr. Torrance. Mr. Torrance.
Aye, Richard, aye.
Okay. Mr. Torrance votes aye. 6 votes in the affirmative, no negative. We can go to the second reader in August.
All right, last one up is EA 21-0042, Sarah Sandston. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second Conway.
Moved by Middleton, seconded by Conway.
Chair Schleifer.
Yes.
Chair Schleifer votes aye. Mr. Burnett is absent. Mr. Conway.
Aye.
Mr. Conway votes aye. Mr. Costello.
Yes.
Mr. Costello votes aye. Vice President Middleton.
Aye.
Vice President Middleton votes aye. Member Ramos.
Yes.
Member Ramos votes aye. Mr. Torrance.
Aye.
Mr. Torrance votes aye. Mr. Chair, 6 votes in the affirmative, no negatives. We can move to the second reader on at the August meeting. That's the.
All right, thank you very much. Congratulations to all of the nominees who have just passed through the committee onto the full council. You are now welcome to sign off as we proceed to the next hearing of the committee. The next hearing we will begin with is CC 21-0096, Ordinance Building Code Permit Exemption for Sheds. We held a hearing on this a while ago, and this is a work and voting session. The main summary of this bill is to provide an exemption for any sheds that are under 120 square feet. These are gardening sheds, ones people keep their bikes in, their lawnmowers, their gardening tools. A lot of the other local jurisdictions have this exemption as well. So if you go to Home Depot or Lowe's or any other store and purchase one of these gardening sheds, you can put them on your property. Last hearing we had some concerns from a committee member and some of the agencies regarding what people may interpret by there being an exemption from this. And even though it is the National Association of Building Codes has this in their recommendations, there were still some concerns on whether or not other laws such as property lines or alleyways or CHAP districts or other laws may possibly be circumvented because of this. What was explained then, and I'll reiterate now, is that with every law we have on the books, ignorance of a law is not a reason to break it. And in addition to that, even though having an exemption on smaller sheds still does not give you permission to put that or anything else on your neighbor's property or in alleyways or violating any other laws that exist on the book. But to make sure that we are clarifying and making sure that it's abundantly clear that you have to be aware of some of those other items. So if people are looking up the building code, and they're gonna, they're thinking about whether or not they need a permit, they will see that we've added an amendment to this that clarifies and says that all other existing laws are still in place, and you must still follow those. The committee had a couple of questions on the bill. Thank you to Stephanie from Housing for sending us the follow-up on it. It was actually quite eye-opening to see some of the stats, but one of the things that, and as the bill sponsor, stuck out and was surprising to me was how few permits, well, that part didn't surprise me, that there's very few permits over the past 3 years that we were requested on this topic, but more so is how few notices, even going back to 2018, says there were 13 notices on a similar topic to this. So whether it's sheds or accessory structures, and so it's clear to me that the citizens of Baltimore are not aware that there's even currently right now a rule on the books that if you need a shed, if you have a shed, that you need a permit for that shed. Now that I've been working on this bill and, and as making this a priority to work through, every time I drive down any street or go anywhere in Baltimore, I notice every shed that exists. So there's a lot more sheds than I thought we had in the city. And so what's very apparent to me is, based on the volume of sheds that I see going through the entire city and how few permits have been requested, even over this period of time, clearly people are not aware of this. Clearly this burden should not be placed on the citizens of Baltimore. The other thing that was laid out for us is this process, the permitting process. I attempted through somebody's account to start seeing if I could navigate this, and as a council person who receives many complaints regarding this process, I can tell you it's extremely burdensome to go through this many steps in hopes to get approval for a shed. One of the other things that my research has shown me is that sheds are a pretty seasonal product. People typically buy sheds around the same time they buy a new lawnmower or a new bike, or spring, summer, and so this process that clearly will take some time does not lend to the quick purchase that people need to make in order to store these items. We know that we have a lot of smaller homes in the city, and people need a place to be able to store their lawnmower outside of their living room or basement. And we much prefer having people store these items in a clean manner, as opposed to just dropping it in their backyard or chaining it to their steps. And so that is the main summary of the bill. Now I will entertain any questions from the council or anything that any of the agencies would like to lend to. I will first start with members of the committee. If you have any questions, if you can just show of hands. Seeing no question. Oh, go ahead, Councilwoman Ramos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee, and thanks, Mr. Chair, for your time earlier today. I just had a quick follow-up. I don't see the amendment in the packet, but I haven't gone through the whole thing yet. But I remember what you had said that the amendment would be doing. Given the amendment, you had said that the planning department was okay, but what about housing? Because they still have a negative. They still object to the bill.
Well, we're gonna get to the housing department
Okay.
after. So if your question is to hear from the housing department, we can move on to the housing department.
That would be great.
All right, go ahead, Stephanie.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Stephanie Murdoch, Legislative Liaison for the Department of Housing and Community Development. I'm also joined here today by Jason Hessler, our Deputy Commissioner of Permits and Litigation. As we previously said, DHCD supports the intent to streamline the installation of sheds for constituents throughout the city of Baltimore. However, as previously outlined in our bill report, this legislation does raise some issues that should be carefully considered by the council. The primary purpose of reviewing permit applications and their accompanying site plans and construction documents is to ensure that sheds are built to meet certain safety standards, meet certain zoning standards, and CHAP requirements. Our main considerations are where the shed will be located, what it will be used for, and how the structures will be tied down. As the councilman mentioned, while the number of applications for shed permits is low in the past 3 years, we've only had about 162 shed permits, and we've issued 13 notices for work without a permit. And I will note that those numbers aren't conclusive because we don't have a way of specifically searching for complaints related to sheds. So that's a ballpark, but still pretty low. It is worth noting, however, that these permit reviews can prevent issues down the road for the property owner and the surrounding neighbors. Basically, if this legislation was enacted, it would transfer much of DHCD's front end work around the permitting of sheds to back end around enforcement when we are notified of complaints. For instance, sheds built outside of the zoning code requirements may be located in a front yard or a corner side yard. If it's not meeting setback or lot coverage requirements, sheds that were improperly built that pose a safety risk, those other issues, we would be notified on the back end through the 311 system through complaints. However, we have had the opportunity to review the sponsor's amendment, and we do not object to the bill as amended, but we do urge the council to consider the possible consequences of this legislation. And myself and Jason stand by to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. Jason, welcome to the committee. One of the key reasons I did not put it to a vote last time, although I could have very easily done so, was because you had a prior engagement, and we all on the council respect and thank the tremendous amount of the work you do on this topic. I know you and I have spoken about this prior to me introducing it, but I wanted to also give you the public option to weigh in or to say anything you'd like to say.
Thank you, Councilman. I don't think I need to go too far into, Stephanie kind of covered everything there, and your summary at the beginning was good. Just important for the public to know that when buying and installing a shed, they do need to refer to the code and make sure that, particularly the zoning code, that it's allowed in their property based on whether or not it's a historical district, and then that it's set back far enough from the property lines as to not be a zoning violation.
All right, thank you very much. And, that was our intent of the amendment, to make sure it's clear to people that there are other laws, other associate laws that you must be aware of prior to that. That's something that would be great to have in a lot of other topics as well, but certainly that is something that I think we're leading the charge on. Another thing that's come up, is other similar topics where that has been, people have mentioned, oh, I didn't look at this or I didn't look at that. And again, not knowing about a law is not an excuse, but we want to make it clear that you got to keep searching. So thank you for that. Councilwoman Ramos, I saw your hand raised. You have another question?
If you don't mind, I have a question for housing.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So I brought this up, I think, at the last hearing before I had to leave quickly, unfortunately, and then also with the chair and the sponsor. I have a situation where there are multiple sheds in the paper alley, and they should not be there. And so I understand where applying for a permit would allow the homeowner, who should have done it anyway, to know, oh, you can't put your, actually, sometimes people don't even know that there's a paper alley back there in this situation, right? So, but it sounds like with only 160 some complaints about sheds, that people don't actually know that they have to get a permit for a shed, and also don't know that there are these other things that we have to deal with. So has in light of this bill, has housing thought a little bit more about how to address some of those other violations? Because even if this bill passes, the fact that all these sheds are on the paper alley is still a problem. Is it just reacting to any 311 complaints, or is it trying to be a little bit more proactive?
Yeah, well, for sheds is something that would be a response to a 311 complaint, unless there was, an egregious situation or we were responding to some other issue and observed those problems. It just, out of all the things that, that we're proactively doing, that's not at the top of the list, to be, honest. We are working on some website improvements to kind of have clearer directions and better information on the permitting side, which, if this bill passes, wouldn't necessarily apply to sheds, but it should help in clarifying to people, what does need a permit, what doesn't need a permit, and the process to go about for certain things. So I think that kind of partially answers your question, that there'll be more information out there for the public, and in a more visually appealing and more accessible to the public.
Thank you. Anyone have any further questions? Members of the council? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion. Do I have a motion to move Council Bill 21-0096?
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, are there amendments?
The amendments were moved at the last meeting, so we'll move the bill favorable as amended.
Okay, just point of reference, who, because I'm gonna have to contact legislative reference to get the amendments to the executive secretary. Do you know, who's the point person up there, huh?
Well, it was Tony.
Yeah. Okay.
But it was moved and approved last committee hearing, so.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just for your reference, the committee's reference, and Richard's reference, the for lack of a better descriptor, new Tony in legislative reference, there is a gentleman up there who started this week. His name is Benjamin Guthorn.
Okay.
All right. Well, we'll circle back with new Tony before the next council meeting to make sure everything's done right.
And Mr. Chair, I have a question as well, quickly, before we jump into the vote.
Who? I don't see who that is.
Conway.
Oh, go ahead, Councilman Conway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to help me sort of wrap my head around this issue, thank you for giving some of the numbers on how often we get the permits. This question's for the housing department. How long at the moment is the permitting process to approve one of these shed permits?
It should be only a couple of days, a day or two, if all the information is provided. The main piece of information outside of a description is a site plan that shows where the shed is physically being located, and then depending on the size of the shed, how it's drawings to show how it is being secured to the ground. So if both of those are in place, it should only take a day or two to approve. If we have to go back and forth with the customer to get the correct information, then it can take longer.
Thank you.
And then to follow up, since we're presuming that this may cause some work on the back end instead of the front end, how long does it take to actually review a complaint?
Any complaints would come in through 311 to housing inspections, and they handle 60 to 70,000 service requests a year, but their average close time is like 4.1 days, and that's counting weekends and holidays. So they'd be out there on a complaint quickly. If it's in violation, then a violation notice would be issued to the owner. This isn't something we would normally issue a citation for. It would be a violation notice for them to correct. And then if it didn't get corrected, it could be elevated to citations or litigation if necessary.
And for clarity, for the permitting process, do you guys actually go out there, or do we just go based on what's actually written in the permit application?
After the permit's applied for, it's issued, and then it would get finalized by the customer calling for that final inspection. So it's up to the customer to call in to let us know when the shed has been installed and ready for inspection. So
I see. So,
Councilman Conway, can I step in and just provide you the steps also, so that
sure, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, I just want to walk through the steps on this. So if you were at the store and you're going to purchase a gardening shed, first you would have to go and create an e-permit account. Okay, once you start there, then you'll be looking for how to apply for a permit. You're not going to find anything that says sheds. You're going to have to start with the new construction or addition, residential 1 or 2 family dwelling units of less than 600 square feet. So by the time you get an answer to find out that that's where you need to go to start, your next step would be to complete the application and upload the plans. That would also include drawings and information from the shed manufacturer. The next step is, as it would go over to zoning. So zoning would have to vet and authorize it. Then the next step is a plans reviewer would go through and review the task, accept the plans, and if there's any comments, they would submit the comments to the applicant. And then once whatever their comments are, if there's any other steps, then it would get approved. Then the office services verifies the application, makes referrals if necessary to other agencies. After that, after everything's approved, office services processes the permit and sends a payment link to the end user. After the end user gets the link, they can pay for it. The permit is issued and sent electronically to the applicant. So as you can see, there's a lot of steps involved. I would encourage anybody who's interested in the permitting process, and I know Housing's done a great job over the years since we've been on the council. They have really made a lot of improvements. The e-permits was something that I think came in 4 or 5 years ago, so that's fairly new, and it's been improved over time. And so there is a lot of steps to it, and it certainly is cumbersome to presumably to somebody who might be applying for their very first permit. The typical person that would be going on there would not be somebody who's building new homes and deals with the permitting process every single day. It would be your neighbor on either side of your house that has that shed in their backyard. They would be the ones that would be going through this process.
So it sounds like a pretty intensive process on the front end already, although it may take 1 to 2 days to approve. There's a lot that goes into that application process. And if there's a violation on the back end, effectively it comes in through 3-on-1. We check it out. Either it's a violation or it is not a violation, and then that person is cited.
Correct.
With a violation notice.
Okay. Okay, thank you. That's all my questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Councilwoman Ramos, you got another question?
If you don't mind, Mr.
Sure.
Chair,
Go ahead.
to Mr. Hessler, the only other question I had was whether you see sort of a slippery slope here. I don't see one, so I just didn't know whether that's something that that Housing was concerned about. That if we don't allow permits for this, is there or say that permits shouldn't be for this? Is there something else that we worry about? One thing that I had mentioned to the chair was sort of this ADU question about, a cottage in the back or whatever, and you definitely can't have that because what we're talking about here is a 10 by 12 or, or less structure. So, but I don't see any other slippery slope, but I was just curious if you all did.
I don't think so. I mean, this is, I kind of tried to go back into the legislative history or when the changes were made or when we adopted the ICC from prior building codes and why we didn't adopt this section. And there wasn't much there, but what we kind of put together is it was really out of concern of people kind of jumping the gun and purchasing the shed that wouldn't fit on their property, and that we would have caught it had they applied for a permit. And so that's where it was exempted out. Most of the code, it's there for life, health, and safety, and a 10 by 10 shed isn't really putting anybody at risk. If they're buying it, having it delivered at their house, there's not a life, health, safety issue there. So we're comfortable, and should someone come through and say that we don't need permits for sprinkler systems, we would have an argument of why it's important to have a permit. I should have brought this up with an earlier question. I'm gonna put in the chat a link to our website. We did in April of this year a series of 4 virtual how to pull permits, and they were recorded. They were very well attended. They were recorded. They're available for review on our website, along with the PowerPoints that serve as kind of step-by-step guides in how to pull different permits. So I was just going to put that in the chat if anybody wants to look at that. It is on our website at dhcd.baltimorecity.gov under permits. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, can I just follow up on one thing that Mr. Hessler said? So the building code, the ICC building code, does not have a requirement for having a permit on the sheds?
Correct. There's the international code that is adopted by the state and then by the city with amendments. There's a section of exemptions, and one of them is for small sheds that we're discussing here. We don't adopt everything that the ICC does. We add things to it. We change things, and that goes through a process, and the council approves it usually every 3 years, following the state adopting a new version. So this is one that just over the years we exempted out.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other members of the council with questions? If not, I will entertain a motion. Go ahead, Councilman Costello.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I move the bill favorably as amended.
Second.
Thank you very much. Moved by Costello, seconded by Middleton.
Chair Schleifer.
Yes.
Can I understand that Member Burnett is now on but doesn't have video? Are you there? Mr. Burnett? Can you hear us? Mr. Burnett votes aye. Mr. Conway?
Aye.
Mr. Conway votes aye. Mr. Costello?
Yes.
Mr. Costello votes aye. Vice President Middleton?
Aye.
Vice President Middleton votes aye. Member Ramos?
Yes, and if I could explain my vote, Mr. Chair. I think been the one with the most questions and concerns about this, and I appreciate, Mr. Chair, you answering and getting the information that we needed. I do still worry about this sort of being, making sure that people are getting the right information about what shed they can have and where to put it, because like I said, we have this issue with sheds in the paper alley. So as you and I talked about earlier, Mr. Chair, that might be something that we could work on, is some sort of notice or, something at time of purchase, so people are clear about what needs to happen. But I do understand the streamlining and understand where you're coming from on this. So I do vote yes with those caveats. Thanks.
Thank you.
Member Ramos votes aye. Mr. Torrance?
I vote aye.
Mr. Torrance votes aye. Mr. Chair, there's 7 votes in the affirmative. No negatives. We can go to second reader in August.
Thank you very much. Thank you, members of the committee, for your support.
Mr. Chair, before you go into local control board, we're having a technical problem with nominee 0044 Trey Murphy. She's on the she's in the attendee list, but the system won't allow me to elevate her. I had her taken out and put back in, so I assume the issue was with her device. But we can figure out how to proceed. But she is here.
No problem. So we're going to proceed, and Trey Murphy can log out and log back in. And if they are not back at the end, then we will give them a call on the phone and see how we can tie him in. But hopefully, Trey Murphy can log out and log back in successfully.
Yeah. And look, preferably with a different device, if that's possible.
Gotcha. Do any members of the committee want a 5-minute recess, or is everybody okay with proceeding? Looks like everybody wants to go. So we'll proceed with nominations for the Local Control Advisory Board. Thank you to the nominees for your willingness to serve. The format will be introduce yourself, give us some information about your background and why you are interested in serving this commission, and what you would like to see this commission accomplish. We will start at the top, EA 21-0043, Ray Kelly. If you can please turn on your camera and unmute yourself. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Am I okay with audio?
You're okay with audio, but we see a picture of a house.
Let me turn the camera around. I think that's the issue here.
Okay.
How about that? Is that a little better?
Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ray Kelly. I'm the Executive Director of the Citizens Policing Project. I've been a public safety and police reform advocate from West Baltimore for about 13 years. We've been engaged in advocacy around local control since 2013, since trying to strengthen the current Civilian Review Board. I've served as the lead community liaison for the consent decrees monitoring team, and also the chair of the Civilian Oversight Task Force. So I've been engaged in this work for almost 2 decades now, and this is one of those instances where there's an expectation and a need to actually see this process through to the end. And local control for my community of Sandtown, Winchester is an important aspect of actually giving the community access to the department that's ordained to protect and serve them as well.
Okay. Is that the completion of your presentation?
I mean, I could definitely go into why I feel the need for local control, but that was just an introduction of who I am and my background.
Sure. Thank you for that. And can you just elaborate a little bit on what you'd like to see from this commission?
Well, I'd like to see the creation of a process that not only does what's in the best interest of the community, but also ask the community what its best interest is. And for me, there's been a lot of debate over the decade about local control and what's the benefit versus the distractions or defactors from local control. And I think this is a situation that should be settled by Baltimore City residents, and hopefully this advisory board can create a mechanism that gives Baltimore City residents that choice.
Okay, thank you. And I see that it says that you're on the consent decree monitoring team. Is that correct?
My tenure ended with the monitoring team on June the 30th. So now I'm solely working for my community organization in West Baltimore.
Gotcha. Okay, so were those specific terms? Are you going back on the committee or?
No, I didn't sign a contract. There's a new lead community liaison now, Ms. Wanda Watts, who was previously the Central District's neighborhood liaison. So they've already moved forward and that position's been filled and the process continues.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. Members of the council will go around. Everyone can ask any questions that they have. I will start with the order in which I see you, Councilman Costello.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ray, great to see you. Ray is someone that I've had the opportunity to meet, become friends with, work together over the last 7 years. Ray, one of the questions that I'm very interested in, which I plan to ask all the nominees today, is: are you in support of defunding the police? And if so, what does defunding the police mean to you specifically?
So I am in support of a conversation around defunding the police, but I also believe that there has to be a strategy and mechanism. So for me, it's what I've always advocated for was more investment into community-based solutions and addressing the root issues. So my goal is more equitable budget. So it's more for me a divest from law enforcement and investing in community-based solutions to crime and violence. So we want to address the root issues and prevent more crimes in our communities.
Thanks, Ray. And my second question is, are you in support of abolishing the Baltimore Police Department?
No, definitely not. As you know, I have family directly impacted by violence and other ills of the city, and I'm in full support of the concept of law enforcement. I have issues with the term policing, but I understand completely and support Baltimore City and its efforts to enforce the law and have that type of law and order situation.
Thanks, Ray. Appreciate the candid responses. Mr. Chairman, I'm good. Thank you, sir.
All right, and just for the record, for this hearing, due to the level of importance of this hearing, I'm suspending the two-question rule. So if you have more than 2 questions, any members of the committee, feel free to continue asking them. Obviously, if you go on too long, we'll have to come back to you. But you're not limited to 2 questions. Next person I see on my screen is Councilwoman Ramos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Kelly, we can't see you. There you go. Great. I do have a question. This particular committee, advisory board, is very important. I wonder if you might be able to talk about, what you feel like this advisory board should be doing and is doing, it's supposed to be doing, and your feeling on the duty of this particular advisory committee.
So I think the most important job of this advisory board is educating the public on all the aspects of local control, the pros and the cons, as well as creating the structure necessary to make sure that the community gets heard on how they proceed in this process. So I think there's a lot of listening we as an advisory board has to do, where we have to know that, one, this is what the residents want. The residents understand the pros and cons. We figure out how we ensure that all residents are heard through this process with the vote or whatever mechanism we choose. And then we continue to educate the community on the process so they can make an informed decision on the end.
I appreciate that. So this, as I understand it also, is very much a process advisory group.
I think that's important, that it's community that actually creates the process. So all communities have that access to the process. So we know that policing impacts different communities in different ways, and we want to make sure that we are hearing from every corner, because we know we can't create a mechanism for just Sandtown, Winchester, or Roland Park. We have to make sure that the concept that we adopt of policing is adaptable and equitable in every community in Baltimore City.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Next up, Council Vice President Middleton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and hello, Mr. Kelly. I know that you have long history and are definitely involved in Baltimore City and trying to make it a better place. And this committee definitely needs different perspectives and on how to resolve our disparity issues, our race issues, and moving forward. I guess my one question to add, what kind of resources do you think you could bring to the table of this commission? Any particular resources that you would like to, add and share on this committee?
So we continue to be directly engaged with the community. So we do have the ability to bring the community's feedback in real time to the process. We also have access to the vast network of NACOL and other organizations, national and local, that we've been working with for decades on this issue.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. And just to all the nominees, on this hearing and to members of the council, due to the nature of and the importance of this hearing, I would just ask that everybody keep their cameras on for the duration of the hearing. This commission requires a very high level of transparency and accountability, and it is being televised and will be watched on other mediums as well. And so it's important that people can see who the nominees are and get to know you. And so thank you very much for understanding. The next council person I see on my screen is Councilman Torrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a quick question for this nominee and the other nominees. My question is related to directly local control, especially the council's role. What do you believe the council's role is in policymaking for the police department as you move forward with making the advisory on how we move forward?
So I would hope that the council role becomes the role of the parties and the consent decree process as it stands, where you guys are the ones that they have to filter those policies through, and you are the scrutiny, and you, because of your close proximity to your constituents, get to kind of get that feedback and ensure that moving forward and beyond a consent decree, that the police department continues making informed decisions and use a community informed process as well.
Thank you. And then as for my follow-up question, one of the main questions I have, I'm sorry. Oh, one second. I'm going to pass on this round, Mr. Chair. I have to attend to my son.
Sure. Next up, Councilman Conway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got one question, and this will be the same question for each of the nominees to this committee. Of course, as Chair of Public Safety, I realize this is a very, very, very important role that you guys are stepping into, and I want to make sure we get this right. I want to make sure you guys do the right work and inform the city in the right way. So my question actually has to do with some of the nuts and bolts. What is your familiarity with the current state and city agreement with the police department? And from that agreement, from that understanding, from what we're trying to move toward with local control, what part of that agreement, what part of that understanding are you most qualified to inform, and why?
I missed the first piece of your question. Could you repeat it, Councilman Conway? I'm sorry.
Sure, I'll repeat it briefly. What is your familiarity with the current agreement between the state and the city with regards to the police department? And given that agreement and what we're trying to accomplish here by moving that responsibility and control of the police department to the city, which part of that agreement are you most qualified to inform on?
So I think since I've been engaged in this process of actually advocating for local control, I've definitely run the gamut of understanding the tort liability as well as the diverse financial commitment and how that's structured. I've definitely worked with Solicitor Andre Davis on his testimony about the impact the change could have on Baltimore. And I think my familiarity with the whole process of trying to attain local control is a benefit to the advisory board.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I think we covered all the council people whose cameras are on. If any other questions anybody has, please speak up. Seeing no further questions, and we could always come back to a nominee. We will move on to the next one, EA 21-0044, Trey Murphy.
She is on now, Mr. Chair.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Actually, I'm sure that not a problem. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Good evening, everyone. Chairman Schleifer, City Council members, fellow residents. My name is Trey Murphy. I am a lifelong Baltimorean and a resident of the 2nd District. I have many different credentials and qualifications that you all should have already, so I won't go through that for the sake of time because I'm sure you all have a bunch of questions, but I'll just highlight a few that I think is relevant to this appointment. So I currently serve as the Director of Organizing at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, the nation's oldest and premier civil rights law organization. I also serve as a co-founder and director of programs and strategies at Organizing Black, a grassroots membership-led organization focused on racial justice, participatory governance, Black liberation, all of those critical pieces that we find important to what we call the Black struggle. And I currently possess over 10 years of community organizing experience in racial justice that span many different issue areas, including criminal justice and policing reform. Specifically in criminal justice advocacy, my advocacy includes, but is not limited to, reforms to the Baltimore City Police Department, specifically the consent decree, advocacy around repealing the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights, reforming the Maryland Public Information Act, eliminating qualified immunity, ensuring Title VI compliance, and of course, advocating for local control for the Baltimore City Police Department. I am interested, particularly inside of this task force, because I see local control as a racial justice issue that only further emphasizes racist stereotypes that says that a majority Black city cannot regulate its own public system. I find that to be a gross injustice, and if confirmed, I'm looking forward to the opportunity to be a part of the work that corrects that particular injustice. So I'll stop there, and I am welcome to answer any questions.
Thank you. First up, Councilman Conway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Murphy. Mr. Murphy, I've got the same question for you. Can you give me some insight on your experience, your familiarity with the current state and city agreement with the police department? And then based on that insight, experience, and knowledge, what are you most qualified to inform upon, given your experience?
Of course, yes. So my particular experience, of course, naturally, I'm on the outside, so my particular experience is all centered around advocacy. As I understand it, the state actually regulates the policy of the police department, and the city only is allowed through the mayor to appoint the police chief, which gives a chance to regulate some policies within the confines of what is already written out of the city charter or the state constitution as pieces of policies are passed by the General Assembly. My particular area of expertise in this and what I would offer that I would bring to the table, one is a depth and lifelong history of just living in Baltimore and understanding the relationship between the police department and the community. I think that is pivotal. I think it would be an understatement to not agree with Ray Kelly, or Director Kelly, as we call him, in his last statement around the particular pieces of making sure that the community has a direct seat at the table. I find that was the important part of this confirmation here for members who are sitting before you all, was to make sure that there were people who came from the community. And then I sit at a legal law organization, right? Where I've, over the course of at least last year and then before that at the ACLU, have had a chance and the opportunity to understand some of the integral nuances of the Baltimore Police Department, of issues relating to it. I remember the fight around body cameras, right? And the dispute that happened around if the city council could actually pass an ordinance that mandated that every officer wears body cameras. So those particular pieces are pieces that I can bring insight to this task force, especially as we talk about what does it need to shape out to be in terms of what type of local control Baltimore City needs.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Next up on my screen, Councilman Torrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to go back to my question about, for Mr. Murphy, how do you see the council's role in local control?
Yeah, so again, sort of not to belabor the point, but to agree a little bit with Director Kelly. The council, to me, well, let me separate it this way. What the council role should be to me is the ones that actually regulate the policy of the police department and provide some level of oversight of the department, right? I think that it still is the case that the mayor appoints the police chief, that the police chief still has the opportunity to manage the day-to-day operations. But when we talk about oversight, when we talk about the ability to actually implement the policies that are written by the consent decree, the city council should be the ones in the position to actually pass those things and ensure compliance with those things. Because what I know to be true is that as it's currently set up, many things have to go through the state General Assembly and then through the governor. And these people, with the exception of course, naturally our representatives from Baltimore City, these people do not have to live with the consequences of their actions, right? Whatever policies are passed as it relates to Baltimore City Police Department. So it is of my belief and my stance that the people who should be responsible for passing these policies, for implementing the consent decree, should be the ones that Baltimoreans have duly elected and have charged with representing us, which is not the way it is currently set up.
Thank you. I yield back.
All right, thank you. Next up, Councilman Costello.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Murphy.
Before you get
thanks.
started, Councilman Costello, just a reminder to all the nominees and members of the council who are participating to please make sure your cameras are on. Thank you. Go ahead, Councilman Costello.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Murphy, thanks for your interest in serving on this committee. I'm going to ask questions that I ask that started with the first nominee and plan to ask each of the nominees. Are you in support of defunding the police? And if you are, specifically, what does that mean?
Yes. So yes, I am in support of divesting from the police department. I fundamentally believe that there are duties and responsibilities that currently exist in the police department that are better served elsewhere. I think it would be an understatement to say that the police department and police officers in general have become a catch-all for all of the responsibilities that are not clearly defined in other city services, right? And that is a part of what I feel like has happened today, which is we have police officers who are engaged in mental health cause. We have police officers who are engaged in homelessness, who are engaged in sex work, who are engaged in nuisance laws, who are engaged in nonviolent issues that come up in Baltimore City that are, to me, better served elsewhere. And so, to me, defunding the police not only means taking money away from the police department, but it means actually reducing the roles and responsibilities of the police department so that they can focus on a very narrow, very limited scope of work that hopefully will allow them to be a little bit more efficient, but also, quite frankly, not engaged in some of the racist, unconstitutional policing that we have historically seen in Baltimore City.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. Before I jump to my second question, I just want to clarify, because I know language is very important. I had asked about defunding, and I noticed you used the word divesting, and I just wanted to clarify that, and you answered my question, right? So I'm not trying to catch up or anything, but when you talk about that, you talk about it as divestment, not defunding, just so I understand correctly, right?
Yeah, so I talk about it as both, right? I'll be transparent to be able to say that the term defunding has had a particular connotation to it that has not been well received by many people, right? And so I am an organizer by trade. I understand the concepts of relational organizing, and that most of my work centers around the ability to build deep, authentic relationships with individuals and help to ensure that we address their issues. And oftentimes that means changing the language, right? So if the language divestment is a little bit more digestible to understanding what the actual concepts of defund is, then that is the language that I hold true to trying to use.
No, thank you. That's helpful. My second question is, are you in support of abolishing the Baltimore Police Department?
Yes, so I am an abolitionist at a personal stance, not because I am an anarchist, right? I think that again, this is where we talk about language, Councilman Costello. Many people understand abolition as anarchy or as there's not a need for a public safety strategy. I think what we saw in Camden, New Jersey, and what we continue to see, particularly in places like Minneapolis, when they talk about abolition, it's a type of abolition that I subscribe to, which is what is the actual public safety system that we can put in place that will best serve the community and the residents and the folks that is charged with protecting and serving, right? I think that that is an abolition philosophy that I subscribe to, right? Ones that says that we don't need any public safety, that there isn't a need to address things like violent crimes, things like issues of sexual assault. That is an abolitionist philosophy that I don't subscribe to, right? Now, I want to be clear about one thing, that I'm not an abolitionist for tomorrow, right? I'm very process oriented. I am very clear that in order for us to get to a place of building a new system, it means that there still has to be a current system in place right now. And so the question on the table for me, especially as it relates to local control and the local control task force, is can we make this system as good as possible to meet the current needs of today? And I think that there's a larger question on the table for the community around are the issues that exist within a police department, the Baltimore Police Department, so systemic that we need to think about what a transformation looks like, right? And for me, that is what abolition means, is to be able to transform into something that is going to be able to best serve and utilize the people that it's protecting and serving, and best cut out the mission that it has laid out at its foundation.
So to make sure I understand that response, and that's all very helpful context, more directly, or let me ask the question a bit more directly. Do you support abolishing the Baltimore Police Department? I mean, and that's all helpful context, but I just want to understand, do you support, and abolish, as I understand it, is defined as formally put an end to? So my question is, do you support abolishing the Baltimore Police Department?
Let me understand your question. Are you saying abolishing it without putting something else in its place?
I think that question's probably posed better to you, just as I.
Yeah, because I'm
trying to understand where you're coming from. So I want to understand if you support abolishing the police department.
Of course,
and
yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I noticed that Councilman Torrance has his hand up. I don't know if you.
Councilman Costello, you still have the floor. I mean, let's get some clarity, and then we'll move on to the next councilman.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I'm just trying to figure out. I think they're saying the same thing. I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. Mr. Murphy, are you referring to the model that was done in Camden, New Jersey?
Correct. That's the
okay.
model that I
just wanted to make sure.
But also the model that has been talked about in Minneapolis, Minnesota currently, right? Which is that there needed to be a significantly narrow scope for armed individuals. And of course, naturally, that model has not been tested. It has not been put in place. But I do, to answer Mr. Councilman Costello's question more directly, I feel like I answered it a little bit inside of my last response. But if we are talking about putting an end to the Baltimore Police Department that has been entrenched in unconstitutional racist policing for decades, and standing something else up in its place that still has all of the key components, being able to respond to issues of gun violence, being able to respond to issues of sexual assault, and having a personnel that is able to do that, then I am definitely all for figuring out what it looks like to transform the Baltimore Police Department. Do I think that that is the context for this hearing? I don't think so. I don't think that affects my ability to be able to substantively say that this is the type of local control, these are the type of duties and responsibilities that the council should have when we talk about what type of policy or charter amendment or new piece of legislation that needs to be brought up. I think that all of those are particularly separate pieces from this larger conversation that I hear you raising, Councilman Costello, which is around, is there a need for a transformation within the public safety system of Baltimore City? Which personally, I'm a fundamental belief that there is a need for a transformation, because to this day, and you all can probably tell me a lot better as ones who have to hold regular hearings with the police department, to this day, they've made progress, but there are still really deep entrenched issues within the Baltimore City Police Department.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. I do think the answer to the question of whether or not nominees believe that the police department should be abolished is very germane to the task at hand that this commission will be tasked with, as required by the Senate bill that established this commission. Because when we talk about transformation and the transformation that is occurring now, whether you agree or disagree with the efficacy of that transformation, there is a transformation that's taking place that's required by the federal government, obviously the consent decree. And I'm trying to get at with my question here is, because this local control piece is part of that transformation. It may not be part of the formal transformation that we're going through under the consent decree, but it's part of the larger transformation that the Baltimore Police Department is going through as we start to reimagine public safety. And I'm just trying to understand where the nominees want to go with the transformation of the police department. So transforming it, in my mind, is one thing, and abolishing it is another. And the reason I asked that question is because you have publicly been vocal about the need to abolish the police department on Twitter on at least 3 occasions. And I think that understanding where you're coming from when you use the language abolish is important for me to understand your intentions. Mr. Chair, I'd like to yield back my time, but I'd like to come back and ask more questions after we get through this round, if that's okay.
Sure, and I want to give I want to give Mr. Murphy an opportunity to just clarify, because I know Councilman, certainly I agree it's a very relevant question. You asked the previous nominee the same question, Mr. Kelly, and he gave us a very direct response, and I appreciate that. So I just want to give Mr. Murphy an opportunity to just clarify a little bit, because I'll be honest, I'm also not clear on the answer to the question regarding abolishing the police department. So do you support today abolishing the Baltimore City Police Department?
I'm sorry, say that one more time. I'm
just trying to give you an opportunity to clarify the last back and forth, because it is a little confusing. So do you support abolishing the Baltimore City Police Department?
Got it. Yeah, so I mean, my answer still remains the same, which is that my interest on abolishing the police department is completely contingent upon how you all are defining abolishment, right? So my definition of abolishment, I completely agree with, and I stand by, right? My definition of abolishment still centers around if we could come to an agreement tomorrow around what the new system of public safety would be in Baltimore City, I would wholeheartedly support abolishing the police department with a process, right? If there is no agreement on what that system of public safety is that makes sure that it holds intact the key responsibilities that the police department currently serves in society, that addresses the greatest issues in our society around gun issues, gun violence, sexual assaults, many of those things, then I would not support abolishment, right? But my answer is completely contingent upon the ways in which you all are defining abolishment, right? For me, I subscribe to my definition of abolishment. So yes, I would support abolishing the police department inside of Baltimore City if there was a system of public safety that we were clear on, that was clearly defined. Talk about the specific pieces of the critical functions that the Baltimore Police Department currently holds.
Gotcha. So we'll move on, but just to just to clarify, so you're saying today you do not support abolishing the police department because we don't have the next process in place.
Correct.
Is that correct? Okay, I got you. All right, thank you so much. We'll move on to the next. The order actually just shifted on me over here, so I apologize if you just asked the question. But Councilman Conway.
Mr. Chair, sorry to interrupt. Ms. Councilman Burnett went back into the attendee list in the same mode as Mr. Murphy, and it can't be elevated. So if you can hear this, or if you can advise him that maybe he should sign out and sign back in a different.
If Councilman Burnett has any questions that he'd like asked, if he can't log in, he's welcome to send it to me or any members of the committee. We're happy to ask any questions on his behalf. Councilman Conway.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I did ask my question, but I'm really trying to understand, Mr. Murphy, what you mean here. I'm struggling to wrap my head around the ins and outs of what abolishment means. So I kind of want to dig more into what you're ascribing to here, particularly because I believe that local control is in part key towards the reformation of the police department to address a lot of the issues that we see. Mr. Chair, I believe Councilman Torrance has his hand up.
Yeah, but Councilman Conway, hold on a second. Councilman Conway, you finish asking your question. We'll go to Councilman Torrance next, but I think you got to finish your question.
Sure, Mr. Murphy. Can you explain to me what you mean by abolish the police department? Do you want to get rid of the police department now, or not? Yes or no?
Yeah, so I am saying that the police department should not be gotten rid of now, right? So I am not in support of tomorrow there's no police, right? There are specific roles that the police currently occupy, right? And I've already outlaid what I feel like are the most egregious that to some extent may require some level of it. Sorry, I'm gotta adjust my phone. For some reason, for some reasons may require a potential armed response, right? And we know that that if we privatize a public service such as an armed response, there is the potential for chaos, right? So I am not at all advocating and saying that tomorrow we should wake up and police officers should not be in existence, right? What I am saying, though, is that the history of policing, particularly in Baltimore City and in general, is deeply entrenched in white supremacy, right? They come out of the long lineage of slave catching. In Baltimore City, we know it has been documented on a number of occasions, whether it comes from the Gun Trace Task Force, whether it comes from the consent decree investigation, whether it comes from the many individuals in our city who have lost loved ones or whose loved ones have been brutalized by the Baltimore City Police Department. We know that there are deeply rooted issues within our police department. It would be insane to believe that everybody would believe that the police department could be reformed, right? Like I think that would, to me, be an insane and irrational logic to believe that everybody should believe that the police department should be reformed. Now, I think that there is another side to this coin, which is that this is what we have right now to deal with some of those more egregious crimes that I've already outlaid. And so until we can get to a place of talking about what it looks like to potentially set up an entirely new system of public safety, one that says that there should be an armed response to sexual assault, to gun violence, to murder, right? There should be some level of investigations. But do those responsibilities have to still exist within the confines of what the current system of the Baltimore City Police Department is? I would venture to say that they do not have to, and we can think about what it looks like to completely remake the Baltimore City Police Department. I think that Councilman Costello elevated one particular point that I only halfway agree with a little bit, which is that many folks would argue that the consent decree is the transformation of the Baltimore City Police Department, right? Many individuals would argue that. Mostly I see it as individuals who are in positions of power making that argument, whereas opposed to everyday citizens and community members who I talk to oftentimes says that there needs to be a further transformation because the progress within the consent decree for a wide variety of reasons may be slow, right? This is one of the reasons why, is because Baltimore City does not have local control, right? And so, like I am not sort of one-sided to believe that my mindset cannot shift at any point inside of the future. But as it currently stands right now, I feel like it would be irrational and illogical to believe that everybody should have faith that the police department could be reformed without completely making it up from the foundation up.
So I just want to kind of hinge on that last point you just said, because you said a lot there, but you do or do not believe that the police department can be reformed
I believe that the police department can be reformed, right? I think that there is a question on the table around how much reform can happen with the kind of foundation within the police department, right? The foundation that has already been laid somewhat by the Baltimore City Police Department and somewhat by just historical context that we understand. And so, yes, reform is possible. It is definitely on the table. Have we seen the level of reform that community members have been asking for and demanded? I would venture to say no. We have not seen that level of reform. And so that is why many people like me believe that a new foundation needs to be laid and that a police department can be built from the ground up. But again, that is a process. It is not going to happen overnight. And people like me are not advocating for tomorrow. You cannot point to any public statement that I have made that says tomorrow the Baltimore City Police Department should be abolished. In fact, if you could point to any public statement, it probably is highlighting some of the most egregious acts of the police department with a caption that says that this is the reason why people are saying that the police department should be abolished. And I feel like those are completely different contexts. And so I want to make sure that my words are not, and my intentions are not miscrewed to believe that I am advocating for no public safety system in place right now.
All right. So to paint a finer point here, you're saying you would not get rid of the police department right now, but you do have some fundamental concerns about the foundation of the police department, and that you do believe that we would need to replace the police department.
I believe that that option should totally be on the table, right? And again, like I said, my mind could shift. Maybe the police department will agree to a reduction of its role, right? That says that it should significantly focus on issues of violent crime, right? And that be its particular role, right? And that would be a reform that I would think would be acceptable if the current police department stayed in place. But as it's currently codified right now, I think that that option to replace the police department should totally be on the table.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to go a little out of order. What's on my screen and go over to Councilman Torrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a few questions for Mr. Murphy so that we're all on the same page, because I think I know where he's going, but I just want to make sure the council knows where he's going as well. So, Mr. Murphy, you're alluding to similar to what happened in Camden, New Jersey, correct?
That is correct.
And in Camden, New Jersey, you discussed how each department. I was just going to ask you a series of questions, yes or no, so that they can understand like the context. So, with Camden, they went department, unit by unit, rehired officers and retrained them. Is this something that you're alluding to in your question, in your answer?
Yes, but can I make a slight sort of addendum to it, which is that I don't believe that the Camden model was perfect by any means of the word, right? I think what they did in terms of going unit by unit, position by position, and structure by structure was a very effective model in terms of being able to assess where the holes are at in the foundation, you know, which pieces of the foundation should be done away with, and probably which pieces should be kept, right? Now, I think that there's something to be learned from Camden, because Camden, to some extent, still became a catch-all for all of the responsibilities that were not clearly defined out of other city agencies, right? And that would be a particular piece where I would say that there's some nuances there that we should be mindful of.
Thank you. My next question. Sorry. Can you guys hear me again? You can hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. So my next question relates to, we talked about Camden model, department by department. The other question is abolishment. And the question is, if this advisory council did not move or recommend an abolishment, would you still support the recommendations of the advisory board?
I think if I'm appointed on the advisory board, I am at the will of the collective. I mean, you know, I cannot stress enough that this advisory board in many cases is just like organizing, right? we do not move ahead of the community, right? Where the community is at, in many respects, is a reduction of the role of police in society, but it's not completely abolition, right? That's why you have never seen a bill that I've advocated for that says that we should be abolishing the police department tomorrow, right? And so if the advisory board makes a particular recommendation, then that is the recommendation of the advisory board. I have either two choices. I can resign from the advisory board, right? Or I can stay on and support it. But those are the options that are on the table. And so as long as I am on the advisory board, I will be supporting what comes up on whatever the final recommendations are of the advisory board.
Thank you. You're back.
Okay, thank you. Next up, I see Council Vice President Middleton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I was listening to the dialogue back and forth on defunding the police, but I guess everybody's just wanting the straight answer. Do you believe in defunding the police or not? And it seems like Councilman Torrance kind of helped to clarify some of that. So just getting into the question that I that I'm going to keep asking everyone is what
you're breaking up for me.
Can you bring this commission to help? I'm breaking up. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Council Vice President, if you can just start from the beginning of your question.
Okay. So my question was the same as, and that is these inequities or problems that you basically talked about, and you identified a number of things based on your advocacy.
I'm sorry. I missed the beginning part. It sounded like it was breaking up again.
Council Vice President, do you want to try turning off your camera and then asking the question and turning it back on? It might use less bandwidth, and then we can hear the question a little better.
I think we're losing you. Did you hear that beginning?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yes, I was just suggesting that if it's not working with your camera and audio on, sometimes if you turn off your camera while you ask the question, then we can hear the question, and then you can turn your camera back on.
So you want me to try that again?
Yes, if you don't mind.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So my question was, what resources or target strategies can you bring to the commission based on all the inequities that you kind of talked about and the problems that we have with the police department, based on the advocacy that you seem to continue to stress and talk about? Are there specific target resources work on and change our police department?
Yeah,
what specific strategy?
Yeah, I think it still was a little choppy, but I think I understand the gist of your question. So you let me know if I fully answer this. So, I see the issue of the local control task force as a significantly narrow scope of work, right? What I understand the task force to be is to be able to study the different models that exist in terms of regulations of police department and be able to recommend substantively what type of regulation of a police department should exist on the local level, right? I think that is completely different from the advocacy that I'm already engaged in around police reform more broadly and criminal justice reform more broadly, which would be everything from being able to eliminate qualified immunity to talking about what it looks like to ensure that there is policies in place that substantively hold police accountable, fixing the broken disciplinary system that we oftentimes have when it comes to police that says that they are above and beyond any other public official when it comes to protection, talking about Title VI compliance, right, and what it looks like to ensure that there is a checklist that officers meet a specific standard when it comes to the high level of professionalism, and then ensuring that there is a certain level of oversight over police officers, right? Both in terms of their time, which is a big issue inside of Baltimore, but also in terms of their actual actions out in the field.
What'd you say?
Sharon, you're unmuted.
I hope that I answered the councilwoman's question correctly, but you all can feel free to let me know.
I'm good.
Okay, thank you. Next up, Councilwoman Ramos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, committee. Mr. Murphy, what do you think the role of this commission, of this advisory board that you're nominated for is?
Yeah, so I believe that the role is, again, going back to my last response, it's significantly narrow only to be able to recommend what specific policy or law or constitutional amendment needs to be passed in order to shift the policy oversight from the state to the local level, right? And so that means to me that Baltimore City would be able, the city council in particular, in conjunction with the mayor, of course, naturally, would be able to actually do the policy regulations of the Baltimore City Police Department. When there are consent decree policies that are proposed, they are in a position to be able to pass a law at the city level to implement those policies. That's as I understand the role of this advisory board to be, to propose, recommend a policy that will achieve that goal.
So if I hear you correctly, that you believe that the role of this particular advisory board is actually to get us to local control.
Correct.
Right.
Well,
yes, I agree.
to make a recommendation that gets us to local control, but yes, Councilwoman.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's it.
Okay, we are back to Councilman Costello.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In terms of the issue of defunding, what's your view on how quickly that needs to happen? Is that, should we cut more money or should the mayor have proposed, or should we have cut more money from the budget this year? Is that something that should wait until there are other support systems in place to transition that functionality that you had referenced before away from police into other civilian agency responses?
Well, I think to your question, Councilman, I have a fundamental belief that there are actually some systems that are already in place right now. We are inside of a city that has some of the leading medical systems inside of the country, right? So to believe that they cannot help with non-armed mental health responses, I think is a failure. So I do think that there are some systems in place. There are organizations who specifically work with certain segments and populations of people, everything from B360, who works with people who ride dirt bikes, which has become a huge thing inside of the city, to other organizations such as Safe Streets and Ceasefire, right, who are doing community mediation in real time whenever there are issues inside of the city. So I actually believe that there are a number of systems and avenues that are already in place right now that would be better served if they were adequately resourced to be able to handle some of the responsibilities that is currently being occupied by the Baltimore City Police Department.
And you had mentioned before when we were talking about the the concept of abolishing and what that means. You had talked about, or you had referenced armed individuals and law enforcement officers that are armed, right? Do you believe that we should have law enforcement officials that are armed?
You said that are unarmed or that are armed?
That are armed. That are armed.
I think that we should totally have enforcement and officials that are armed, right? I don't know like the specific terminology around law enforcement. Like if you are getting to what I think you are around my specific responses on abolition, then there's a need for individuals who are armed. I think that it would be a fair sense to believe it. I don't know if we call them peacekeepers. I don't know if we call them law enforcement officers. I don't know if we call them police officers, right? I leave that to a wide variety of community members and citizens who are going to have to live with the consequences of their public system to actually vote on what that name should be, right? But is there a need for armed individuals? Yes, there is.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, next up on my screen, see Councilman Conway.
I think I have come to understand your perspective, Mr. Murphy, and I just want to try as best I can to summarize what you said so far to make sure that I understand where you're coming from. So if I'm summarizing correctly, please say yes or no. You're saying that you believe that there are deep-seated fundamental issues in the police department as it stands.
Yes.
That you are fundamentally concerned about the ability to fix some of those problems, and that starting fresh with the police department is in some ways a way to do so, to fix those issues. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And that you have, as a result, a pretty narrow perspective on what the police department should be focused on. That being issues that really require only police, things that only police can really respond to. Is that what you're saying?
That is correct.
Okay. And with regards to local control, now, in the meantime, by way of your thoughts, you believe that that we need local control, that local control is in fact very helpful toward any reformation process for the police department as it stands. Is that correct? That you don't need necessarily, given your own personal thoughts, this commission to agree to completely defund and restart the police department. That's not what you're looking for. That's not what you are really looking to add to this commission.
Correct. And that's the scope of work of this commission, as I understand it.
It is not. That is true. So to get to that question, what, and maybe this will help me really the most, what are you really looking to bring to the commission? What role do you see yourself fulfilling should you have the opportunity to step onto the commission?
Of course, yeah. So I think that this is probably a question that is similar to one that I can't remember which council member asked. But there's two main pivotal roles that I see for myself. One is, again, following some of the particular pieces that the director, Kelly, had already elevated. There is a role for substantive community input. I think Baltimoreans have been saying for a while that they feel left out of the process, the vast majority of Baltimoreans, right? And that there have not been substantive apparatus to be able to directly influence city processes, right? And so my particular role is to ensure that the particular pieces around what type of policy the local control task force recommends at the end has substantive community buy-in and at least has the level of political education that we can transfer back to the community, right? As we are making decisions on the task force, making sure that the community is updated. So that is one particular piece. But the second piece is, I think, historical context, right? There's an old saying that if you don't know your history, it's very difficult to know where you're actually going, right? And there's a particular historical context that I have and many folks in Baltimore has that I can elevate and bring inside of the space. There may be conversations around are there particular roles and responsibilities that the city council should play when we are looking at the different models that exist across the country, right? Those particular pieces can be influenced by historical context and many of the historical knowledge that I have been fortunate enough to study and learn over the course of my time in this work.
Thank you. And then my last question here, when I really think about the questions that my colleagues have asked, how pointed we've all been, I think it's really important. I think, one, that we understand where you're coming from, because I think it, I don't want to say too much, but completely abolishing the police, not having a police department, I think is, to your point earlier, a little bit ridiculous.
And
we need to have a police department. We do. I think everybody here, I hope everybody here, we haven't gotten through everyone else yet. But what's really important, do you believe that you can work with the commission? Do you believe that you can work with the commission if there's a disagreement when it comes to any of these matters?
I mean, I sit inside of organizations such as the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, where oftentimes organizational policy may be different from my own personal views. So the short answer to your question is yes. The longer answer is, am I going to push? I think that the community and constituents that I am accountable to, the hundreds, if not thousands of people that I've had a chance to meet in Baltimore, and have conversations around police reform, police accountability, and transforming public safety and reimagining public safety would expect me to push, right? And so I think pushing and not being able to work with the commission are two totally different things, right? And so I am very clear that I bring a particular perspective, one that is deeply rooted in racial justice and racial equity, and one that will hopefully add value as we make recommendations around which type of local control Baltimore City deserves.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Let's see who's next, Councilwoman Ramos.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I guess I have a question for you and maybe the mayor's office. Like, I actually thought that the role of the commission that we are nominating people for is to simply be on this. I have the legislation in front of me to be on to get us to local control, to make recommendations, not even recommendations. It's a process. We have to negotiate contracts with the unions. We have to negotiate all of these things, see what other things need to be passed in the General Assembly in order to give us local control, and that it is us as council members who would be going through this particular process of asking ourselves these questions about, the policies around the police department. My understanding was that this work that we're nominating these residents to and Baltimore City residents to is to help us get to local control. It doesn't even say that they get to form the policy around what local control looks like in terms of actually whether there's a police department or not. So I guess I just don't understand. I want to just be clear with the public about what we're actually doing here.
Okay, I mean, we could ask the mayor's office to respond to you if you'd like. I think I see Natasha on here. Or Natasha, do you want to weigh in?
Hi, apologies. I was trying to unmute. And so are you asking me to weigh in specifically on the Councilmember Ramos's statement in regards to the role of the advisory board?
Yes.
Yes. So the role of the advisory board is to provide recommendations on how we could move forward with local control. Ultimately, this has to go to the voters on the ballot, and their recommendations will help shape generating local control for the city. But ultimately, when it comes to the actual policies that would be in place, that would, once we have local control, that would rest with the city council. You would then have the ability to direct policy as regards to the police department that you currently do not have. So the board itself does not have that authority to change any of those policies. It's just about the procedure itself to get local control. And that is how the bill passed out of the General Assembly.
Thank you very much. Councilman Ramos,
Mr. Chair.
do you have a follow-up question?
No, I just wanted to say thank you for entertaining that, because I was getting super confused, because it's our role to be able to have these questions asked of us around, what we believe should be the policy of the police department, whereas what we're trying to do here in this committee is to just nominate folks to be on the advisory board to help us get to actually getting local control of our police department. So I just wanted to try to be clear on that, and I really appreciate your time on that. Thanks.
Yeah, not a problem. I'm happy to entertain that and to provide any clarity for the public. I think it's also important to note that it is our requirement as city council members on this committee to properly vet all candidates for commissions and boards and other directors of agencies. And it's important to do that vetting now so that when the recommendation comes out, the public does have a reference point. We'll have this committee hearing to go back to understand, what went into that. So nobody here can predict what the recommendation is going to look like, but we need to do our due diligence now so that based on whatever the recommendation looks like, we can see how this played a role in that. So thank you for your question. I have a question. I think it's my turn back around. Mr. Murphy, early in the beginning, you had mentioned about changing the word from divest to, from defund to divest. What is the difference between those two words for what we're discussing here with the police department budget? Is there a difference between those two words?
Yeah, Councilman, I do not see a major difference between the two words, right? I think that both of them requires a reduction of the budget. I just think that the major difference to me is that one seems to be more palatable to public officials, members of the community, etc. And the other seems to not. And my only guess for why the word defund is not as palatable is because of the specific connotations that is associated with it in the wake of the most recent racial reckoning that happened, that was spread in the wake of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, right? And we saw many places across the country begin to quote unquote defund the police department. And so that is the only major difference that I can see, is that one specific word has a negative connotation for some odd reason, and the other does not.
So just for my own clarity, so does that mean basically it's just a marketing difference? Like you had mentioned that for the sake of advocacy, that it was, people were not appreciating defunding, but divest, you said, is easier for them to take on. So it's just a marketing difference on how how the messaging is done, and there's no actual difference between divest and defund.
I am not a communications or marketing person. So I would leave that to a marketing person to answer. I would venture to agree with the latter part, which is that I don't see any major difference. Again, one is just probably more palatable than the other. So it could very well be a marketing person, but I have not studied marketing well enough to know if that answer is actually accurate.
Gotcha. So it's safe to say that when somebody says they want to divest from the police department, that means they want to take money away from them, and which essentially also is defunding the police department.
That is my assessment.
Interesting. Okay. I'll move on. I see Council Vice President Middleton. Do you have any other questions?
No other questions. I just want to thank Councilwoman Ramos for kind of bringing everything back to the main perspective of what really this board, commission, task force is just charged to do, and Natasha Mihu for just kind of really clarifying that as well. Thank you.
Oh, no problem. Last council person I see with their camera on is Councilman Costello.
I'm good. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Anybody else with questions before we proceed to the next nominee? Okay, thank you. We will now thank you, Mr. Murphy, for answering all those questions. We will now move on to the next nominee, EA 21-0045, Aisha Parker. If you would like to take it away, introduce yourself and give us some background. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Ashia Parker, and I am the Executive Director of No Boundaries Coalition and a proud resident of the 9th District. My background, I have worked with the No Boundaries Coalition to advocate for different issues and initiatives in Central West Baltimore. I was with No Boundaries when No Boundaries did public education around the consent decree and ensured that residents were included in that process. I also sat on the state commission of Restoring Trust in Policing, which offered recommendations of just that, restoring trust in policing, and did some additional work, additional research work around the fallout with the Gun Trace Task Force. And currently I am a co-facilitator at the Baltimore City Police Academy. I co-facilitate community policing and trust building. And that is one of the training modules that was mandated by the consent decree.
Okay, is there, would you like to add anything on to what you'd like to see out of this commission?
Sure, what I would like to see from the commission?
Yes.
So definitely, I would like to see the commission to be able to bring recommendations and processes that would help ensure that we can have sustainability and actually have success with local control here in Baltimore. I am a public administrator, so I am looking forward to bringing my skills and knowledge of logistics, budgeting, leadership, all of that to the table to ensure that we have sustainable, efficient policies, things that make sense, and then also able to translate that to everyday Baltimoreans. So citizens actually know what is going on before they have to vote or before this is actually done. There are so many times that legislation, plans, policies are done in Baltimore, and the everyday person has no idea of how these things actually work. So I'm looking forward to being a person that has the skill set of bringing these kind of things together, and also has the community reach to explain what this really means and how this can affect our communities.
Gotcha. Thank you. And I'm looking through each. I previewed everybody's resume before the hearing. Based on some of the stuff you said in the introduction, it seemed is your resume that you have here up to date? Is there anything that that's missing that we should have added to this?
I'm not sure.
Like you had mentioned, unless I think.
Yes, no,
I
I do
apologize
not.
if I missed it.
I'm sorry, I do not have on there that I teach at the police academy.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's what I was looking for.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I'm not overly familiar with that position. Is that a paid position?
It is not. I'm doing it
Oh.
as a community leader.
Gotcha.
So
And
I teach 2 modules
okay.
twice a week to hundreds of police officers
Oh, wow.
on my own time.
That's very generous of you. Thank you for that. So it's twice a week at the police academy down at University of Baltimore.
Yes, sir.
Gotcha. And how many other people have this position that did some similar courses?
8 or 9, maybe.
Okay. All community folks or police officers included?
So the police who are employed by the police department, they teach half of the modules, and then they have brought in community members to teach the other half of the modules.
Gotcha. So there's 9 community members there, and the rest are police.
Correct.
Gotcha. Okay. I was not aware of that. Thank you for that. Is there anything else that, and so I see here it says that you're the executive directors of No Boundaries Coalition. So that's your full-time job?
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Let me see. There was one other question I had. I didn't see it here. Is there anything else that's missing from the resume that we should be aware of, or? I'm trying to see. I can't find it based on what you were talking about, different experiences and stuff. All right, we can come back to that. I will go on to the next council person, Councilman Costello.
Ms. Parker, good to see you as always. Thank you for your interest in serving on this commission. I want to ask 2 questions that I've asked all of the other nominees. The first question is, are you in support of defunding the police department? And if so, specifically, what does that mean?
Yes, so I am in support of defunding or divesting. I don't want to get into the semantics, but I do agree with Brother Trey that there is some connotation there. But yes, I am in support of it, and how it looks for me is that the city will be able to look at the police department and transfer some of those funds to community-based programs and projects, and take some of the burden currently off of police officers. So again, making sure that mental health folk are on staff. So if there's someone who is having a mental health crisis, they can accompany the police, or they may go on their own, depending on what the crisis is. Maybe having the same thing for youth who are in crisis, having people who are trained with dealing with youth. Just being able to take some of that budget. We understand that the Baltimore City Police budget is one of the highest departmental budgets that we have in the city. And that the higher the budget goes, it doesn't seem to be in direct correlation with our crime rate and how crime is policed here in the city. So I would be interested in looking for ways to maybe reimagine how we spend police dollars, and definitely have community-based support. So when we call 911, it's not just that officer that goes out, but there are other people who may be more qualified for what the cause or what the issue is.
Thank you. So just thinking through the current budget, is there specific areas from the existing budget that you're or what are the specific areas from the existing budget that you're suggesting could be used differently, if you will? I don't want to put words in.
Yeah, so I don't have the budget in front of me, and I haven't studied it line by line. But I am acclimated with budgets. I run my own business, so I always know that there is places in every single budget that can be shaved or reimagined to have additional dollars. And that's what I'm suggesting, that there's a deep dive of the budget and that we can reimagine, even if it's just $1 million, we can reimagine how that money can be spent to better suit the community.
Got it. Thank you. And then my second question, Ms. Parker, are you in support of abolishing the Baltimore Police Department?
No, I am not in support of abolishing the police department. I definitely think it should be, and it definitely is now, a conversation of what the police department would look like moving forward. But I don't believe that we can just get rid of the police department at this point in time.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
No problem. Next up, Council Vice President Middleton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Ms. Parker, I have been talking about, and that's what resources or target strategies could you bring to this commission? And with you sharing you're already volunteering a teaching experience with the police department, which is awesome. Is there anything else that you are going to hone in and bring to this commission in the conversations that are going to happen on that board or task force?
Yes. So again, I do have access to the community and would be able to bring the voice of community. But just kind of getting back to what this commission is, I believe that I have a strong administration background. So I really look forward to researching other models, thinking through logistically how these our recommendations would actually work or can be sustained. Those are, I believe, my strong suit. I can team build. I am a leader. I am organized. Unless there are some people who are going to be confirmed that are not on this call now, seems like I am the only woman or one of the other only women that will be on this commission. So I look forward to bring a strong female voice to this commission as well.
Thank you for bringing that to the forefront, because we definitely need the voice and perspective of women. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so just to clarify, I just want to let you know, I'm looking through the list that was provided to me of the current representatives and designees on this commission, and it seems, just from my quick count, that there's 6 women on the committee as of now, and there's still some other openings that are still left there. And Council Vice President, I'm happy to forward you the list that I have, so that
awesome. Thank you.
You could also see what the openings are. So there's different appointees from based on the state legislation that certain people have yet to make their appointments, like the Civilian Review Board or so anyways. I'll move on to the next.
Mr. Chair, can you forward that to all of us, please?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Be glad to. Next up, I guess now that Councilwoman Ramos, now that you started speaking, it just rearranged my screen. So I guess you're now up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and colleagues. Hi, Ms. Parker. How are you? It's great to see you.
Nice to see you as well.
I think you talked a little bit about this in your introduction, but if you could talk about it a little bit, what you see the role of this particular board being, and your hopes for making it successful.
Yes, so I see the role of this board as making recommendations for how local control will look, feel, and be here in Baltimore City. Also, maybe making recommendations around what the actual transfer would look like, will transition from the state to the city. And then I also think the role on this board would be to make sure that there's strong community voice and representation throughout what that final product would be.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
No problem. Next up, Councilman Torrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just want to make sure that for public and transparency purposes that I do declare that I am a member of No Boundaries Coalition's board and know Ms. Parker both professionally and personally. Also, to be more transparent, I just want to make sure, similar to the other members of the nominees, what is your idea of the role of the council in terms of local control?
I'm sorry, say that again.
I'm sorry. What is your vision of the council in terms of local control?
Oh, yes, thank you. So the vision for me of the council is to have oversight of what the police department, how it runs, any policies, all of those things would come through the council and would be approved by the council and ultimately would be the will of the people that the council members serve.
Thank you. I yield.
Okay. All right. It looks like we went through everybody. Does any other council members have any questions? Go ahead, Councilman Conway.
Thank you. I've got the same question that I've had for everyone, Ms. Parker. What is your familiarity with the state and the city's agreement with the police department? And given that insight, which part of the agreement, which part of that transfer toward local control do you feel that you are most qualified to provide insight on?
Okay, so my understanding is that the current policymaking and oversight body is the state delegation, and that Baltimore City does provide finances to the police department through the public budget, that the mayor, the police commissioner is hired and accountable to our mayor, but the council does not pass any legislation or policies in regards to how the police department is ran. Now, the second part of your question.
The second part of the question is, in that transition toward local control, what part of that transition do you feel most qualified to provide insight on and to inform upon?
I think that I'm most qualified to actually discuss, vet, and qualify what the actual transition would look like. I, again, love those, does this work? Is it feasible for our city? Do we have the money to do so? Who holds the liability? I can comprehend policy. I can read and comprehend plans. I look forward to actually looking at what is current, what it would look like in that transition, and how to bridge the two, and to come up with recommendations that would suit our city as we move forward to having local control.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions from the committee before we move on? Seeing none, thank you. We will move on to the next nominee, EA 21-0046, Lydia Walther Rodriguez.
Mr. Chairman, so far he hasn't signed in. I've sent messages to the mayor's office to see if we can find the status. I haven't heard anything yet.
All right, we will move on. EA 21-0047, Mark Washington.
He was on. Unfortunately, my screen is locking.
Mark Washington, can I go on?
Yeah, hi, I'm here. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you and see you. Take it away.
Yeah, my name is Mark Washington. I'm Executive Director of the Coldstream Homestead Montebello Community Corporation. I want to thank you all for your time today in this very important hearing. My work in public safety goes back 2 decades. I've worked with the Governor's Office of Crime Control and Prevention, the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, the CSAFE program, and the Department of Justice Task Force. I've worked with the Stephanie Rawlings Blake administration on the crafting of long gun legislation that passed in Annapolis, and was a member of the body-worn camera task force. I continue to work in my role as executive director of CHUM in public safety and on those issues to this day. If selected, I look forward to working and serving with the committee.
Thank you. First up, Councilman Conway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good to see you again, Mr. Washington.
Same
Councilman
here.
Conway, do you have any questions?
Yes, I do. I'm going to ask you the same question I asked all of the folks before you. Mr. Washington, what is your familiarity with the city and state agreement with the police department and how it operates? And given your insight on the agreement and how it works and what we're trying to accomplish here, what are you most qualified to provide insight on?
Thank you for the question. I think it's been about 160 years that the state has controlled the Baltimore City Police Department. Outside of appointing a commissioner and funding support, there is minimal control and influence of the BPD by the city of Baltimore. What local control means to me is that there will be an additional level of accountability for city leaders in running and operating that agency.
And what are you most qualified to provide insight on with regard to the transfer of control of the police department?
Yeah, I've worked with the Baltimore City Police Department for a number of years. As I said, I was a part of the body-worn camera task force. I've worked closely with the FOP and their previous head, Gene Ryan, on a number of issues. Not that Gene and I always saw eye to eye, but we were able to find some common ground and move forward.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, next up, Councilman Costello.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Washington, thanks for being with us here today and your interest in serving. I want to ask 2 questions that I've asked everyone else. The first question is, are you in support of defunding the police department? And if so, what does that mean?
No, I'm not in favor of defunding the police department.
Thank you. And question number 2, are you in favor of abolishing the Baltimore City Police Department?
No.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next up, Council Vice President Middleton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hi, Mark. How are you?
I'm doing well. Very good to see you.
Good to see you as well. So, and I know you have just been a strong advocate, and your love and dedication for Baltimore. I appreciate you and all the things that you continue to do for our city. And I guess the question that I have asked everyone, if you want to target and hone in on some of the strategies or resources that you think you could provide and help in the conversations and the work of this particular task force.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think it's important to note that, and I heard part of the earlier conversation that Mr. Murphy raised some very real and legitimate issues. While I do not support defunding the Baltimore City Police Department, there is a need to perhaps deconstruct and rebuild the way the department functions and operates right now. Obviously, we all know that there are long-standing systemic and institutional issues within the department that I think need to be worked out and addressed. As far as the committee goes, I think my involvement with this committee is perhaps being able to balance the approach that both sides would want to have. As I said, I've worked closely with the governor's office on public safety issues in the past, and it's not always been the most amiable relationship, but understanding that we have to move forward if we are to do the job of serving not only the citizens of Baltimore, but the state of Maryland. And I hope that I can be able to serve in some regard as a bridge there.
Thank you for your answer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
No problem. Next up, Councilwoman Ramos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hi, I feel strange calling you Mr. Washington, but Mark, good to see you. Proud to have you as my constituent. My question is, what do you see the role of this particular board that you're nominated to be on? And how do you see success?
Thank you, Councilperson, and proud to have you as our council representative. I think the board, quite frankly, the role is pretty clear and well defined, and that is to determine a pathway and framework for transitioning state control of the BPD to the city of Baltimore.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, let's see. I don't see any other council people on here that haven't spoken. Anybody have any other questions? Any members of the committee have any further questions before we move on to the next one? Seeing none, we will now hear EA 21-0048, Kaylin Young. You are familiar with this process, so take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to members of the committee. My name is Kaylin Young. Currently serve as the Director of Public Policy at the ACLU of Maryland. Happy to be here to join the Local Control Advisory Board. As many of you know, this is an issue that I've been working on for quite a few years now, both inside and outside of city government. And so happy to take the questions that I've been hearing over the duration of the hearing and looking forward to doing this work.
Okay, first up, Councilman Costello.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Young, good to see you. Again, two questions that I've asked all the nominees. First question is, are you in favor of defunding the Baltimore Police Department? And if so, what does that mean to you?
So I think I would be in alignment with many of the other answers about reimagining the police department, but at the same time, understanding what Judge Bedard recently said in the consent decree hearing, that a full defund or kind of the measure of defund that is a little bit more aggressive might be in violation of the consent decree. And so making sure that whatever we do, we're doing it with a certain plan, with certain actions in place, and of course, with the input of the council as we move forward with that. So it would be reimagining, right-sizing the police department, making sure that those tasks that the police department have that they maybe don't need to be doing are reallocated to different places. But again, with a plan in place first and foremost, so that we are not conflicting with the consent decree.
Thank you. And I heard you mention, reallocating. We've used a number of different words today, but essentially putting that money somewhere else. When you think about reallocating, are there specific areas of the police budget that you think would be prime for reallocation to other agencies or services outside of the police department?
Well, I mean, I think we looked at some of that previously, in particular, not the budget that you just passed, but the budget prior to, where we looked at, for instance, the mounted unit, which I think was actually kept and repurposed to help with youth programming, et cetera. So that would be one example of kind of how some things that are currently used for particularly law enforcement could be used in a different way. I don't have any other specific examples without looking at the budget and the budget line items, but in things like that would be in alignment with that. And then additionally, I would say supporting those behavioral health initiatives like UMB ROAR and some of the other programs around the city that are doing that supplemental work to help deal with people's trauma and prevent violence before it happens.
Appreciate that. Yeah, UMB ROAR does excellent work. Mr. Young, the second question I have is, are you in favor of abolishing the Baltimore Police Department?
No.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilwoman Ramos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Great to see you. I wanted to just ask a quick question. You know the answer because you were involved in the legislation and at the advocacy side. So what do you see the role of this particular board and what success looks like?
I've been looking forward to this question or this whole hearing. So I can say what you said earlier, which is that the role of the board is specifically defined in the legislation, is to study the potential issues and impacts of a transition to local control. The legislation then lists out 6 specific things that the board would then be tasked with doing. I think there may be some other things that may arise as a result of conversations and that deep dive. But for now, I think it is those things. And I would, to Councilman Costello, I would say it wouldn't necessarily involve defunding anything.
Can you just go over those 6 things?
Absolutely. It would be the implementation. We would be looking at the implementation of local control as it pertains to the ongoing consent decree, management of the police department, the transfer of personnel, looking at the different models of local control of the police department, the fiscal impacts of local control, including liability issues, and the details of a potential charter amendment to assume local control of the department.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Council Vice President Middleton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, hello there, Mr. Young. So nice to have had the pleasure of getting to know you and working with you and seeing you again. So I hope you're doing well.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good to see you too, Madam Vice President.
So in the same question I've been asking, all the different people that we're interviewing have, I guess, bring to the table different resources or a target strategy of, and in your discussions that you're going to be having. Could you just kind of maybe hone in as well on what you are definitely going to bring to this commission?
Sure. I mean, I'm going to be able to bring certainly some legal research and analysis skill set. Also an understanding of the history of local control, and not just local control itself, but also the legislative process by which we got here. Also going to bring an understanding of kind of how the city council and the city government works, having worked with former public safety chair Schleifer and Councilman Costello with oversight hearings, et cetera, over the last year and a half when I was working with the council. But then also the legislation calls for some representatives that have an understanding of police reform, criminal justice reform, et cetera. And of course, we know that there was some work that was done, a lot of work that was done in the General Assembly this year that was passed along with this legislation. And so I will be able to bring an understanding of what the legislation entailed, and if it applies to the work of this advisory board, being able to advise the group on that as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see who else we got here. I don't see any other council people. Does anybody have any other questions before we move on?
I think Ms. Young is already.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Councilman Conway.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Mr. Young has already answered my question, but I'll ask nonetheless. Good to see you, Mr. Young.
My pleasure, sir.
This should be easy to knock out the park for you. What is your familiarity with the state and city's agreement as it stands? And in that context, as you think about local control, what part of the agreement do you feel most qualified to provide insight on?
Yeah, sure. I would just amend to say that I don't know if it's quite an agreement, more so just the regular structure. And we're trying to get away from, if it is an agreement, we're trying to get away from it, which is that the state legislature is the place to make policy changes on the police department, and that this body and this council does not have the ability to pass ordinance or policy as it pertains to the department in the same manner that you may be able to do so for the health department or for many other departments that you all oversee. And so the end goal, in my opinion, would be that you all have the same power that every other city and county, rather county council across the state has, which over their police departments. What I would be able to bring to assist with that is first and foremost that understanding and the understanding of what those other councils can do as an individual who has to work with those councils. I'm currently working on a bill in Montgomery County and a bill in Annapolis having to do with police reform as well. And so understanding that they can do this, but you all cannot, is going to be one thing. But then again, what I said earlier about kind of that the criminal justice and police reform work that I've been working on over time is some other things that I'll be able to bring to the group.
Thank you, Mr. Young. I think you'd be a great addition to the commission.
Thank
you,
you,
Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Is there any other council members that have any questions?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Councilman Torrance. Sorry, my camera is off because my internet is going in and out.
Okay, no problem. Go ahead, Councilman Torrance.
I have a question for Mr. Young. We've talked about this often. What do you envision the role of the council is in local control?
Yeah, just to the last answer that I just gave. It's to be able to pass ordinance and policy as it pertains to the police department in the same manner that you can do so for instance, the health department, and making sure that that power is in alignment with the powers that every other county council has across the state.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions for Mr. Young? I think we've been too light on him today. So if anyone's got anything. Okay, before we get moving on, moving forward, like I said in the beginning, I was going to open up the floor before a vote to if there's any questions for any of the nominees based on, I know we asked a lot of the same questions across the board, but if anybody has any of the questions for any of the nominees, you are welcome to speak now. Happy to open the floor up before we move forward. Okay, Richard, do we have Miss Rodriguez? Did anyone make contact?
From the mayor's office said that left phone messages for us, so it'll be the Natasha or Nina on. They can bring you up to date.
I have Miss Rodriguez on the phone right now. She didn't receive a link. I'm trying to forward her a link now, and I think she's having issues, but she's trying to get on at this very moment.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kelly. So we'll give a few minutes for that. You sent her a link already?
I'm sending it as we speak.
Okay. All right. So we'll give her a few minutes. We're gonna recess for 3 minutes and give Ms. Rodriguez a chance to get on. It's very important that we hear from every nominee. And so please, if everyone can be back here, 3 minutes. Thank you. Okay. We will reconvene. Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez, for joining. As I mentioned earlier in the hearing, if everybody who is participating, every council member and every nominee, if you can please turn on your cameras for transparency as we hear the last nominee. Last nominee is EA 21-0046, Lydia Walther Rodriguez. Thank you for joining us. I'm sorry you had technical issues, but I'm glad we got you. So the format is just to tell us a little bit about yourself, some of your background, and why you want to be on this committee. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, and thank you for having me. Again, apologize for the tech issues that I was experiencing. My name is Lydia Walther Rodriguez. I am Afro-Latina, an immigrant to Baltimore, immigrant from Panama. I am the region director here at CASA in Baltimore and Central Maryland. And we have been advocating, along myself, have been advocating for police reform in ensuring that community members are able to engage in this process, and community voices are the voices that we are hearing, particularly directly impacted community members, as we talk about reducing violence in our city, but also making sure that our community are the ones leading the way in those initiatives. So this is one of the reasons that I have nominated myself to be part of this advisory board, as well as the time and commitment that I have to the city and to the partnerships that we have built in order to ensure that we are driving forward with community members essentially leading that way. We have been hearing those community voices for many years, over a decade working in this effort. So I am bringing to the table all of those community voices, particularly immigrant community voices, into the space and what local control in our city means to them.
Thank you so much. We will go through the council and see if anybody has any questions. I will start with Council Vice President Middleton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is the question I've asked everyone. Any target resources or strategies that you're going to bring to this committee or commission? Can you list just some target things that your interest, your main interest that you would like, to share with the commission and try to get some things moving?
Absolutely. I think particularly the community voices. I'm bringing in a lot of community perspectives from all around Baltimore City, from the immigrant community at large, on impacts, their perspective, interactions with, and the effects of what local control has for the immigrant community.
Thank you. That's all. That's the only question I have.
Okay. Next up, Councilman Conway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and pleasure to meet you, Ms. Walther Rodriguez. The question I'm going to ask is the same question I've asked everyone else. I think you'll probably find that from the rest of the committee as well. So what is your familiarity with the city-state structure for the BPD department as it stands? And given that insight, what part of that structure are you most qualified to provide insight on?
I do apologize. You broke up right in the middle. Can you repeat that question for me?
The first or second question. I guess the first question really just sets up the second question, so I'm kind of give you a summary of it. What's your familiarity with the current structure of the BPD between the state and the city? And given that insight and given what we're trying to accomplish with local control, transferring it from the state to the city, what part of that structure are you most qualified to provide insight on?
Absolutely. I'm very familiar with the structure as it stands, knowing the limitations of what our city can do, and knowing what essentially the state is able to do. The expertise I can bring to the table is how that directly impacts our status as a city, as it relates to being a welcoming city versus a sanctuary city, and how that directly impacts our immigrant community. Having local control or not having local control, how it will affect our ability to serve our immigrant community members, primarily as it relates to building trust and knowing that our city local law enforcement is not collaborating with federal agencies. And we do have those limitations currently because we do not have local control, in addition to our jails and how our jails speak to the collaboration with federal authorities.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, next up, Councilwoman Ramos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is, what do you see as the role of this particular board, and what does success look like?
Success looks like bringing about local control to our Baltimore City residents in a timely manner. And I see this board as being a board that is elevating community voices, community advocates, and bringing those voices, perspectives, and needs to this group to ensure that community voices are part of this process.
Thank you. And I'm so glad that you want to serve on this board. It is so important to have our community's voices at the table. Thank you.
Next up, Councilman Costello.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ma'am, thank you for your interest in serving. I want to ask two questions that I've asked all the other nominees today. The first question is, are you in favor of defunding the police? And if so, what specifically does that mean?
Thank you for that question. I am in favor of divesting, defunding BPD in order to bring more resources to different sectors of our city, and where those resources are invested in different institutions should rely on where community feels that those resources should be invested. So with a lot of the previous answers I've given, I want to ensure that community members are essentially guiding our agenda of where those resources should be invested. And I am in favor of divesting funds from BPD and investing back into community.
Thank you. And just to clarify, when we're talking about defunding or divesting in order to invest those dollars in another area, are there specific places in the budget, specific functionality that you think would be appropriate to cut, essentially, to be able to invest in other places?
I would need to refer back to different budgets in BPD to better be able suited to answer that question. So upon getting that summary, I could better answer that question as it relates to where to invest. Again, we are working on making sure that we are being driven by community.
Got it. Thank you. And the second question is, are you in favor of abolishing the Baltimore Police Department?
I have not made a decision on that stance.
Is it? I appreciate the candid response. Is it something that you've considered? then?
It is something that I have considered. As it relates to my indecisiveness with the stance, I am still learning from community where they feel comfortable with using the language of abolish law enforcement in our city.
So just to clarify, well, let me ask the question a different way, and maybe that'll help clear up my confusion. So then two things, because you mentioned the term law enforcement. So are we talking about? So I'm saying like the Baltimore Police Department. Do you have a different position on law enforcement? I guess in general, like you've considered the prospect of eliminating law enforcement in the city?
Eliminating federal law enforcement in the city, yes.
Federal law enforcement. Okay. I'm referring to and I certainly understand that position based on the work you do with the organization that you work with. I'm referring only to local law enforcement. So let me ask that question again. Have you considered the prospect of eliminating local law enforcement?
Yes, I have considered it and have not made a stance on that yet.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Rodriguez, is there a difference between divesting and defunding the police?
In my perspective, there is not a difference. We are talking about divesting, taking funds from Baltimore City Police Department and investing it in other sectors of our city.
And so with your position on that, do you have a set dollar amount in mind, or is it the total budget? What exactly does defunding the police mean?
Not a set dollar amount. The hope is that at least $100 million are divested in the next 2 years, but any amount that is not needed to be invested into our police department, and we can invest in community-led activities to reduce violence in our city.
And so with the figure of $100 million, where does that number come from?
That number is coming from a vision of ensuring that we can essentially put aside a pocket budget of money to other areas of our city that need that support.
Right. So where that 100 million came from, did it say specifically where in the police department that 100 million should come from?
It does not.
So like, is that something that should come from patrol, from detectives, come from crime lab, come from, do you have any thoughts on that?
That is something that we're formulating with many other partners to analyze the current budget of BPD and analyzing essentially what are some of the mandates from the consent decree, and being able to essentially analyze where budget can be taken out of BPD and invested elsewhere.
Gotcha. Thank you. And I have one last question. You had said something about taking the money and putting the money to where the communities want to see the money go. So I'm just curious, how would that, what does that process look like? So if the mayor, it's the mayor's budget, he can propose any budget he'd like. If the mayor said, hey, I want to cut $100 million from anywhere in the budget, and I want to open up that process to let the people of Baltimore decide where that money should go, how do you envision that happening? Do you envision polling the people in Baltimore? Do you envision, I mean, what kind of process do you have in mind on that?
Absolutely a diverse process where we can have a participatory process of community members themselves electing it, whether it be a combination of town halls, community questionnaires, surveys, an opportunity that not just folks who usually give input can weigh in on this, but really a targeted process where we are reaching community members who normally don't participate in this process, but are directly impacted by it, can give their opinions, and we are making a full informative decision based on our community that is directly impacted.
So does that mean that the current process in which funding is handled, which is, you elect the mayor, so the mayor controls the budget in Baltimore City right now. And so we have elections for the mayor, and all the voters get to decide who they want to see become mayor. So are you saying that process that we've had historically isn't good, and we shouldn't have that process anymore? We shouldn't be relying on the mayor. We should have the people who live in Baltimore, making all of these decisions.
The hope is that the mayor is following the guidance of community members' wishes on the budget, and having a more participatory platforms for individuals to be able to do that will be something that will enrich in the process that is already happening.
Okay, so just to clarify, so you're not proposing a separate process, you're a new system of budgeting. You're just saying that the mayor's office, whoever the mayor is at the time, should have a more inclusive budgetary process than what currently exists.
Correct. One that makes space for all community members who want to be part of this process have the ability to do it.
Gotcha. Okay, we'll move on to the next council person. And the order switched up on me, so I apologize if you've already asked a question and don't have a question. Councilman Conway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've asked my question. Excuse the children in the background.
Okay, next up, we got Councilman Torrance. Are you there? Do you have any questions?
I'm still here. I just want to make sure I ask the question. What do you envision the council's role in local control?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Apologies. What do you envision the council's role is in local control of the police department?
I definitely envision the council members being a bridge to their constituents in their district and advocating for the needs of their constituents. Being best placed to be able to advocate for the constituents in their district.
Thank you.
Any further questions, Councilman Torrance?
No, sorry, you're back.
Okay. Is there any other council people who have any questions before we move on to a vote? Hearing and seeing none, I will entertain motions for each one of the nominees. If there is a motion on the floor for each one, we'll then do a roll call vote. I'll start with EA 21-0043. Ray Kelly, do I have a motion?
So moved, Torrance.
Second, Costello.
Moved by Torrance, seconded by Costello.
Ready for roll call, Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Chair Schleifer,
Yes.
Chair Schleifer, aye. Mr. Burnett, I hope he's here. Mr. Burnett, I just reinstated him. He's been falling on and off. Okay, he's not shown out as either panelist or an attendee, but he's had trouble with his device, so we can pass on him and see if we can get him back on before the end of the vote. I don't know, whatever the preference of the chair is.
Yeah, we can proceed.
Okay. Mr. Conway.
Aye.
Mr. Conway votes aye. Mr. Costello.
Yes.
Mr. Costello votes aye. Vice President Middleton.
Aye.
Vice President Middleton votes aye. Member Ramos.
Yes.
Member Ramos votes aye. Mr. Torrance.
Aye.
Okay. Mr. Torrance votes aye. Mr. Chair, there are 6 votes in the affirmative, no negatives. Pending the reemergence of Member Burnett, this bill can move to second read at the August meeting.
Thank you. Congratulations, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, we'll now move to the next nominee, EA 21-0044, Trey Murphy.
So moved.
Second, Torrance.
Moved by Ramos, seconded by Torrance.
Roll call. Chair Schleifer.
Aye.
Chair Schleifer votes aye. Waiting on Mr. Burnett's return. Mr. Conway.
Aye. I'd like to explain my vote if possible.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I understand there were some concerns about Mr. Murphy's stance on abolishing the police. And I really appreciated his transparency on his perspective. I thought it was really important towards making sure that we understood the diversity of perspectives going into this commission. I thought that he was very thoughtful in presenting his case, but ultimately none of that actually matters toward what we're trying to accomplish here. And he made it very clear that he does want to see local control go through. And I think he'd be a great addition to the commission, regardless of the stance on abolishing the police. So with that, thank you.
Can we have your vote, Mr. Conway?
Aye.
Mr. Conway votes aye. Mr. Costello. Mr. Costello.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to explain my vote.
Sure.
Mr. Murphy, I candid conversation. I'm certainly concerned with the viewpoint of abolishing the police department in a city in which we have 350 homicides. Nonetheless, I trust Mayor Scott that he's made, so I'll vote yes.
Vice President Middleton.
Aye.
Vice President Middleton votes aye. Member Ramos.
Yes.
Member Ramos votes aye. Mr. Torrance.
Aye.
Mr. Torrance votes aye. Mr. Chair, there's 6 votes in the affirmative, no negatives. Second reader.
Congratulations, Mr. Murphy. We now move on to the next nominee, EA 21-0045, Aisha Parker. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Motion. Second.
Mr. Chair, who won the race?
It seems like Ramos, seconded by Middleton.
Yes, sir. Okay, roll call. Chair Schleifer.
Aye.
Okay, Mr. Burnett is still unavailable. Mr. Conway.
Aye.
Mr. Conway votes aye. Mr. Costello.
Yes.
Mr. Costello votes aye. Vice President Middleton.
Aye.
Vice President Middleton votes aye. Member Ramos.
Yes.
Member Ramos votes aye. Mr. Torrance.
Aye.
Mr. Torrance votes aye. Chair, 6 votes in the affirmative, no negatives. Second reading in August.
Congratulations, Ms. Parker. We will now move on to the next nominee, EA 21-0046, Lydia Walter Rodriguez. Do we have a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second, Conway.
A motion by Middleton, second by Conway.
Roll call. Chair Schleifer.
Aye.
Chair Schleifer votes aye. We'll come back to Mr. Burnett. Mr. Conway.
Aye.
Mr. Conway votes aye. Mr. Costello.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to explain my vote.
Sure.
Ma'am, I really appreciate the candid conversation. That being said, I am deeply concerned with the mere prospect of abolishing the police department, considering the public safety challenges that we have in the city. Nonetheless, I trust that Mayor Scott has given us due diligence and has made the right decision because of that.
Richard, you're muted.
I was, Mr. Okay, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I didn't hear Mr. Costello's vote. Okay, Mr. Costello.
Yes.
Mr. Costello votes aye. Vice President Middleton.
Aye.
Vice President Middleton votes aye. Member Ramos.
Yes.
Member Ramos votes aye. Mr. Torrance.
Aye.
Mr. Torrance votes aye. Mr. Chair, there are 6 votes in the affirmative, no negatives. Okay.
Congratulations, Ms. Rodriguez. Next one up will be EA 21-0047, Mark Washington. Do we have a motion?
So move, Torrance.
Second, Ramos.
Second.
Moved by Torrance, seconded by Ramos.
Okay. Chair Schleifer,
Yes.
Chair Schleifer votes aye. We'll pass on Mr. Burnett. Mr. Conway.
Aye.
Mr. Conway votes aye. Mr. Costello.
Yes.
Mr. Costello votes aye. Vice President Middleton.
Aye.
Vice President Middleton votes aye. Member Ramos.
Yes.
Member Ramos votes aye. Mr. Torrance.
Aye.
Mr. Torrance votes aye. Mr. Chair, there's 6 votes in the affirmative, no negatives. We can go to second reading in August.
All right, thank you very much, Richard.
One more.
Yeah, we're gonna hold that one over for a meeting, but I guess we'll entertain a motion.
So moved, Council.
For EA 20.
Hold on a second. No, we had an extra attendee. I thought it might be Councilman Burnett, but it wasn't.
All right. Well, we're just trying to keep Mr. Young on his toes. So we'll entertain a motion on EA 21-0048.
So moved, Conway.
Second.
Moved by Conway, seconded by Middleton.
Chair Schleifer.
Yes.
Chair Schleifer votes aye. Mr. Conway.
Aye.
Mr. Conway votes aye. Mr. Costello.
Yes.
Costello votes aye. Vice President Singleton. Sorry, Vice President Middleton. I'm cracking up.
Middleton is an aye.
I apologize, man, but it's been a long day.
I understand, Richard. That's quite all right.
Member Ramos.
Yes.
Member Ramos votes aye. Mr. Torrance.
Aye.
Mr. Torrance votes aye. Mr. Chair, there's 6 votes in the affirmative, no negatives. Let me make one last search for email. No. Okay. 6 votes in the affirmative, no negatives. We can go to the second reader in August.
Okay, thank you. Congratulations, Mr. Young. Congratulations to all of the nominees. You will be proceeding to the full council at the next hearing. Thank you for your willingness to serve the citizens of Baltimore. We are now adjourned. Richard, you can close down the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.